Okay, it's Thursday, March 31st, 2022, and I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Finance to order. The first item on our agenda, as always, is public comment, and I think we have one person here, Joanna Walsh, who is registered to speak. Joanna, if you want to just come up and...
Hi.
Thanks.
Joanna Walsh, 17 Pleasant Street. I am co-chair of CDSP. We still support the Board of Education budget as proposed. Parents continually ask us what is happening with the BOE budget, and we have nothing to tell them. This is the fourth Board of Finance meeting since the public hearing, and we have not heard any discussion of a possible reduction or an estimated target mill rate. If the board is considering a reduction, it does not intend to tell parents about the reduction until right before they vote on it. There will be no chance for the public to comment. Thank you.
Okay. Any other public comment in the room? Okay. Next item on the agenda will be to our normal sort of what we call like the budget work session here, and we currently have really 8 different topics of the budget that we're going to talk about tonight. A few sort of operating aspects of the budget, including police, fire emergency services, library, and then we're going to go into our 5 other sort of revenue pieces of the budget, which compiled together with all of the expenses in both the Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen budget allow us to really start to determine the mill rate. So the first item up is going to be the police, and we have a few members of our police force, including Chief Anderson here, as well as members of the police commission. On our board, Rob Cardone and Dan Baumgartner sort of took lead on this part of the budget.
Thanks, Jim.
So I'll turn it over to Rob to kick it off.
Please. So the police budget this year, pretty uneventful, $165,000 increase in total, 1.89%. Majority of that is a new IT professional full-time. The actual title is Public Safety Hardware and Software IT Professional. I think Dan and I have done this for 3 years. I think for me, on top of that, was 3 other years. Every time I think we did the budget, we always talked about this day coming, Chief.
Yes.
Just a lot of, what do I want to call it, IT, software-related items. One of the things I thought was really interesting, when you have body cams, you actually have to edit out certain parts of the video, and I'll call it regulatory reasons. And one of the things that was really interesting that we learned was Los Angeles has 200 different people that do this full time. The only thing they do all day is basically, I'll say, modify the tape to make sure it's in regulations. And so the job that we have, that we're proposing here, is partly that, along with a slew of other things. There's been a long time person who's doing the job, evidently incredibly well qualified, I guess I'll put it that way. And this is also a bit of succession planning, just in case, you never know, right? So this job, I think this particular ad has been on the agenda for, at least I think in Chief's mind and my mind, I think, Dan, you've seen it too.
Yeah, and to be clear, this is a uniformed officer that's performing this function.
This is a patrol sergeant that does it in addition to his patrol duties.
In addition to his patrol duties, and he also has a very successful business doing this, and so he continues to perform this function for us. And if for whatever reason he should decide to leave, there really isn't anyone that could fill that very large hole.
That is correct. If you would just give me 30 seconds to kind of expound on Sergeant T.J. Moore. And he's been here 20 years or thereabouts. And he's done yeoman service for us, both as an officer and as an IT person. Put this in perspective, we have Taser Axon body camera and in-car cameras. He developed a software portal that allows our officers to just simply dock their body cameras at the end of the shift and not have to actually manually collate and tag the data. So that saves us overtime of probably 15 minutes per officer per day, because he wrote that software program that allows us to do that. Central Square is our CAD and RMS vendor. All our data, call data, is all in Central Square. He's at the Central, I think he just returned from the Central Square conference. He's an instructor at the Central Square conference. He teaches their technicians on how this stuff is done. And lastly, we have Kronos Telestaff, which is our scheduling software. The board might have heard that they were ransomware and hacked, and they were out of business for 6 weeks or thereabouts. That is a multinational, multi-billion-dollar company. The fix for Kronos worldwide was a program that was developed and licensed to Kronos by TJ Moore. So that is the person that we have in place right now doing our IT. No other police department has what we have. And if he should choose to pack up his tent and move on to full-time IT, I'm up the proverbial creek, and this guy can't paddle that boat. So we need to get somebody to hit the ground running that he can kind of bring along, so we are not having that big wide gulf if he chooses to retire.
So the overall operating budget, this is the majority of that increase. The rest is, I'll call, relatively flat, nothing really to speak of. Questions before I go to capital, or Dan, anything to add?
Nothing good.
Just a question on the IT. I think we had talked about this for the last few years. This is really a different skill set than, because the town uses really the Board of Ed technology to drive a lot of our day-to-day, but this is a different type of tech computing.
Yeah, this is more software, some hardware, but more software. As Mr. Cardone alluded to, like a body camera FOI request. We have to redact significant amounts of information out of that body camera. If there's a juvenile involved, all video and audio of that juvenile has to be redacted. If it's a protected party, like a sexual assault victim or a domestic violence victim, we cannot choose to simply not release the video. We must electronically redact and release that copy. So right now, Captain Shredders was doing it. Captain Hadema will do some of it now that she's taken over for Captain Shredders. Our administrative lieutenant does some of it. Captain Marin may do some of it. But I'm looking for this IT person to kind of drive that car on the redaction portion for the most part. We simply can't take body cam footage and release it without viewing it ourselves. Clearly, that would not be the best course of action. So if we have, for example, a domestic violence situation and we're there for an hour and there's 3 officers there and a supervisor, we have 4 or 5 hours of body cam footage that someone has to physically sit there and watch to make sure that it's FOI compliant before we release it. So the IT person will be doing some of that, hopefully the lion's share of that.
It sounds like more than a full-time job for this individual, but to any degree, would he or could he interact with the other IT people in town to learn from each other and essentially build a degree of skill set?
Yeah, I think it goes without saying that this person's going to have to work very well and very quickly with town IT, right, for the hardware end of it. It's not going to be siloed in the police department, certainly. In the event that we come back to this board in the not-too-distant future, potentially for a new CAD system, if we have a new CAD system, it really needs to be a town-wide CAD system with all emergency services tied to that CAD system. That's the kind of interface that we're going to need with the IT people on the town or the Board of Education side as well. They do great service for us, but we're not always at the top of their list. That's just the reality of it. And sometimes they do updates forgetting that we're like Denny's and we don't close on Sundays or Saturdays. The system will go down and we forgot. We're doing an upgrade and they forgot that we're open 24/7. So hopefully that's something an IT professional can, kind of coordinate with them as well.
And Chief, a potential new CAD is potential next couple of years?
That is a distinct possibility. The CAD that we have is no longer supported, and it's going to be we've been trying, for Vision CAD and Vision RMS, which is going to be a cloud-based thing. Because of COVID, everything got topsy-turvy, right? But I think our current product is sunsetted and will soon no longer be supported. We may be getting a new CAD system. And I'm certainly not supportive of a new CAD system that if it cannot hang on all emergency services streamline in a CAD system.
Right. And for fellow board members, if you look at the 6-year capital plan, it's in there. So just FYI. Any other questions before jump cap?
Does this person free up TJ Moore to do more police work, or is he going to need to be spending as much time training the new person?
No, this would certainly free up some of his time. to do what his main task is to run a patrol squad on the road. So, and my main thrust of this request is that he will be here for significant amount of time, or sufficient amount of time, that he can take this new employee and get he or she up to speed on the things that he does. Because right now, if we need to call one of our software vendors on a significant hiccup, no one else can talk the talk and walk the walk of what that is, right? We can call the tech line and say, our system isn't working. Well, other than go to the black box with the 2 red lights on it and push the center button, right? He can speak to them right away and get it resolved. I'm not sure when he actually sleeps, because he seems to always be awake and working on these things. So we're not going to have him forever. That's just the reality of life here in Darien. Trying to get him to stay.
Other questions?
No.
Capital, 2 items I want to point out. A new camera system in the police headquarters, in there for $109, and a drone for $25,000 to help with. Chief, I'll let you, if you don't mind, just kind of a little bit on the drone. I know it's a bunch of police activities, but you're better at this than me.
Yeah, I'm not
It's
real.
actually funded in ARPA.
We funded
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Sorry. So I take that back. So just the camera system, if anybody has questions on the 109 being spent on that.
The camera system, now is 12 years, going on 12 years old. It was very state-of-the-art at the time it was put in. The real inconsistencies and drawbacks of our system was kind of brought to light when someone vandalized the police memorial stone out in front of the headquarters. And although we have video surveillance in the front of the building, it was not sufficient for us to make a definitive identification of who that was. In addition, I'll be coming back to the Board of Finance, I believe, next week for a request for transfer for building maintenance. Some of the building maintenance money in our fiscal '22 budget was taken up by replacing 9 cameras in the building that just failed. These are mission critical cameras. We cannot run a police department without cameras in our booking and cell block. We would be out of accreditation compliance, and certainly on very thin ice without those cameras. So they had to be repaired under an emergency type situation. So a new system should get us at least 10 years down the road. We'll have additional high definition cameras out in our parking lot. That's what's required in the police department today. Pretty much every part of that building needs to be under video surveillance.
So you said you had to recently replace some of them, and this will be the balance of them?
This is 9 cameras that we had to replace because the actual cameras failed. And those cameras, the vendor, we're on a state bid for the vendor. They assured us that those cameras would be able to be retrofitted to the new system. So we wouldn't be replacing those 9 cameras. But I don't know how many cameras we have in the building. I should know that. It's probably 40 or 50 inside and out.
And are they as good as the ones you're going to purchase with the new system?
Yeah, the cameras that they're putting in now will seamlessly interface with that new system.
Any other questions? Capital?
The only other thing I would suggest or ask is, Chief, if you could just speak to the 2 replacement vehicles in the capital request, which aggregate about $73,000.
Yeah, so this year is kind of an anomaly. Because of COVID, we couldn't get police cars. So we kind of got 2 years worth of police cars at one time. So that's why the request is only for 2 vehicles this year rather than our typical 4 or 5. We are going to stretch 1 year of vehicles out an additional year simply because we couldn't get them. So I think this year we're looking for, go back and look, is it 1 marked car and 1 administrative car?
It's 75, cheap, 75,000.
Yeah.
These cars are not cheap.
Right.
The day of a $3,000 police car is over.
And they're to replace existing vehicles that have aged out.
Yeah, what we do on the administrator's cars, however, though, to get even more bang for the buck, that we repurpose them, either the building department gets them, fire marshal might get them, or they may be hour-wise, maybe not still functional for a police car, because it's hours and not miles. They are still of value to the town above and beyond what we would get on a trade-in. You know, a car that we spend, you know, police Explorer that we spend 34, 35,000 on the actual car, we might get 7,000 for it on a trade-in after 3 years, simply because in real use and in real world, it's equal to 10 or 15 years worth of use of the car. Whereas you might open your car door 3 or 4 times a day, that door gets opened 30 or 40 times a day. Or you might run your car an hour a day. A lot of these cars are running 23 hours a day. So we have some wide bodies, and the seats tend to break sometimes, and we have to replace things that it's not your grandma going to church when they're driving those cars a lot of times. So our guys take good care of them as they can, but they're cars that run 365 days a year. So the admin, we do try to get the town more bang for the buck by. If I was going to get a new car this year, when I'm not, the captain would get mine, and it would go down, you know, down the list. So.
Well, Chief, being married to a grandma, I can understand exactly what you're saying.
In terms of the pricing that you're assuming in here, how recently was that updated? Because what we're seeing on the fire department side and some of the other vehicles, not only is there a backlog, but there's certainly some of the quotes that are coming in on the fire trucks now are noticeably higher than what we
ours are pretty up to date and pretty accurate. And what I did over the last 10 years, 8 years as the captain, we would put a number in the budget, but then we would revise that number for the following year when we found out that we could get the car at a cheaper price point. So every year we're looking at that number and getting an accurate projection based on what the dealer tells us. Sometimes it's 3%, sometimes it's 5%. What they estimate they're going to be going up, but we do every year we do amend that number to ensure that we're as accurate as we can be. Sometimes the issue is that say for Ford, they'll change the body style or the interior of the car. And those are the years where expenditures are significantly higher, when you have to get a new ballistic cage, you have to get a new console perhaps, you have to get a new push bar on the front. So as long as they keep these vehicles in relatively the same configuration, we get a lot more mileage out of the stuff that goes in them. So hopefully they don't mess with them. And they probably won't, being that we need a grill from one of our cars that got damaged, and they're talking that there's 19,000 on back order, and we won't get a grill for at least 8 or 9 months from Ford. So they're probably not bringing out any new body styles anytime soon.
Thank you. Any other questions? Operating or capital?
I guess maybe just a question on the operating side. This year, we're running a surplus, and I think that's in part due to sort of turnover, just the speed at which you've been able to find replacements and so forth. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on sort of like going forward, how quickly we'll be able to, in terms of turnover, the speed at which you can find replacement officers, getting them into the academy, that whole process?
Extremely difficult. All police departments in Fairfield County and across the state are really dipping our toe into the same pool. And to be quite frank, we're getting a washout rate of more than 50% in the background investigation or polygraph. Very difficult to find candidates coming into this job now that don't have something that may knock them out. Right now we have 4 openings. We have 2 lateral transfers that are looking to come to us from Burlington, Vermont. We have a couple that were coming from New York, one of which I do not believe is going to make the grade. So it's difficult. On non-certified officer candidates, they're coming to us. The washout rate is more than 50%. And as I told the police commission, and I've told anyone who's listened, I'll go and answer calls or investigate accidents before I hire somebody that I don't believe should be working for the town of Darien. But it's very difficult to get candidates. I think we're going to be running not at full strength for the foreseeable future. I would think out for the next couple of years, based on what I know and looking at our staff roster and who's eligible to retire, that we're going to be running short.
So in recent years, we've had 1 or 2 vacancies on average as well, right?
Mm-hmm. At least 1 or 2, yeah. And some of those were unexpected. We've had officers that came. We had one transfer come from the state police. He retired and came here, and he was only here for 90 days because he decided this was not for him, and he moved on. We had 2 other officers that were here 3 or 4 or 5 years, have left the profession. And I think that's going to continue for the foreseeable future as well.
As we think about budgeting going forward, given the persistent vacancy situation, I don't know, it's probably better for a discussion at a different time, but I wonder if we should start thinking about that in terms of how we budget for salary. Correct me if I'm wrong, we budget as anticipating that we'll be fully staffed, right?
Yeah, we have to.
We budget
have to-
anticipating fully staffed, but historically, we've been running a little bit light. And if it's going to persist for a little bit, maybe in future budget cycles, that would be something we would think about to adjust how we calculate that.
There's nothing I would like better as the chief to be fully staffed, to have my traffic division
Us too.
staffed, and
Us
our
too.
detective division fully staffed, and that may not be the reality for the next couple of years. If anyone knows any quality candidates, please send them my way. We're always looking for quality people from all walks of life who may want to come get in this job. Despite what you might hear on TV, it's still a great job, and it's a great place to work here in Darien. So if anyone has any ideas for good candidates, please send them our way.
How broadly do you advertise?
You name the medium, we do it. We're at job fairs, we're online, we're ubiquitous, we're everywhere. You know, there's no stone that we're leaving unturned at this point, because we're looking for quality candidates. You know, we're better off than some other agencies. At one time, Trumbull had 11 people out with COVID, and they had 15 vacancies, and there were only 80 sworn. So and we actually took at least one of their officers, which we don't go looking for them, but right, they come looking for us. We're not going to turn them away when they're quality officers coming to work for the town of Darien.
Chief, can I ask a question? Made me think of something. When they go to the academy, do they know where they're going afterwards already? Is that the methodology, if you want to call it that? Like, if we get somebody that's in training, lack of a better word, we know they're going to go to Fairfield or Darien or Trumbull, right?
Well, you can't attend a police academy in Connecticut until you're already hired by a specific police department, right? You can leave that police department as soon as you're trained, technically, but then if they came to us, we would owe them the training expenses.
That's right.
Some departments waive that, some departments want the whole
Training back.
and figure it out
Right.
to the last nth degree, down to shoelaces and these peanut butter and jelly sandwiches while they're training. So sometimes it's a happy medium. The good thing that here in the town of Darien, we don't lose officers to other departments. We did, 2 or 3 times 20 plus years ago, but we do not have people coming here and saying, oh, no, the grass is greener over in wherever. We don't have that. Once they're here, if they're not getting out of the profession, they're staying here at the Darien Police Department.
Well, I think it's sort of points out the importance of making sure that you guys that you have all the equipment, the training, fully funded, everything that you need to make sure that people want to come here.
And we hear that time and time again from officers lateral transfer officers that come from other agencies. They say, I got more in my uniform and gear initial issue than I would have gotten in 10 years in X department. And that is a testament to the town and this board and the Board of Selectmen, and especially the Board of Police Commissioners, right? This department is known where if somebody wants to be a police officer, this is where they want to work, because of the commitment to professionalism, because of the commitment to training, and our salary and benefit package is always competitive. If you're going to work in this line of work, this municipality is still widely regarded, not just across Connecticut, across the eastern seaboard, certainly the tri-state area, as a very, very viable option. And we see that on lateral transfers. They're not leaving us once they get here, once they're getting out of the profession.
Okay, Chief, would you introduce the 2 officers you brought with you?
I certainly will. I have my Field Services Captain, Jerry Marin, and my new Administrative Services Captain, Allison Hedema.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Allison hit the ground running upon Bob Schroeder's retirement. Bob, I think, Allison would agree that Bob was kind of a mentor to her for her career. She's going to do a fine job. Jerry Marin is number 2 in charge of the department. He always does a fine job. We work as a team. 100% of the time. So if you call and you ask for me and I'm not there, you can ask for them and you're going to get the same reasonable answer as you're going to get from me. So I can tell you that I've been here for 39 years and we have never had a time that we've had a better synergy, like with Bob Schroeder's, now with Allison and our police commission. Communication between Jen and the finance department, the town administrator, first selectman, both past and present. To me, it could not be any of a better mix. There's no, I think we work very, very well together. I think it shows. I got to give Jen kudos because as you folks know, I'm not a numbers guy. Right? I balance my checkbook, and I know enough about a budget that I can keep myself out of IRS jail. She's the one that, you know, we have the discussion. She always has the right answer and the reasonable answer for us to craft a proper budget, and that way we don't have any trepidation when we come before this board. I mean, I think everything is reasonable, and I don't think there's anything that's out in left field. If there was, we would have caught it by now. Jen would have caught it by now.
Well, maybe just one question in closing. I know there's, over the last few years, there's been a couple different capital items that we've approved, like fixing things like the ventilation, the HVAC, I know was always a headache there. Have those projects been completed? Are you happy with them? Are they working?
The Board of Finance meets Tuesday night. I'll be back in the seat on Tuesday night on HVAC issues. Sorry to report.
That's the answer.
I have more gray hair than I had last year at this time talking about HVAC issues, but no, it is not yet rectified.
Good
I will
question.
have Tony from DPW will be with me to give you the ins and outs and the technical things of why we need additional funds now to, once again, attack the HVAC issues.
We'll see you Tuesday.
See you Tuesday.
Well, no doubt what's been a difficult 24 hours for the community, no doubt is a difficult 24 hours for you and your force. And for your commitment to the town, you have our gratitude, and I'm sure I speak for the entire community. Thank you to all for what you do every day.
Thank you very much. I will pass that along to our folks. And as we were saying earlier, right, for the police department really is the only department that can't say no, right? That we're not coming. No, we're coming. And our guys and gals do a very good job on troubling situations and rendering the best assistance that we can to the public. So I appreciate you noting that for us. It's a tough assignment and a tough day today, so hopefully tomorrow will be a better day.
Thanks, Chief.
Okay.
Thank you, folks.
We'll see you on Tuesday.
I'll see you on Tuesday.
And we'll pray for cool weather until then. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks,
Good
Brian.
night.
Okay.
Yeah, at least our catalytic converters have been safe thus far.
Jesus, I saw that 14 stolen, huh? They can be taken in 60 seconds. You want they bring some sort of saw or I read that they saw or
It's a hacksaw. Electric
I was like,
Yeah.
is this like conversion here? It was so funny. He's
Almost
like,
from
guys,
the,
I came home, I'm
train
like, oh
stations.
my God.
middle of the
Catalytic.
day.
Take it down. Bye-bye.
Just a reminder, your mics are on.
Okay, so the next item on the next item is going to be fire emergency services.
Sure.
Okay, and there's really sort of two pieces.
Why don't we do library since they're here to do this?
Okay. So have a motion to, let's actually rearrange the agenda and move the library up, and we'll swap that with the fire and emergency services.
You don't even need a motion because it's all in the same agenda item.
Okay, even better. So we're going to talk about the library. Kira, if you want to come up and, is the mic on the table on, Jen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for coming. I guess I should keep this up and we'll ask you questions. This year's library budget is $4.2 million, up $111, almost $112,000 from last year, or an increase of 2.73%. Pretty much all of that is attributable to staffing and benefits increases. There were no real new initiatives. The benefits increase, which is the largest percentage increase, I believe, was, dictated by the town, so there really wasn't anything to be done about that. Head count was flat. I guess there was a small increase in some part-time hours. As far as the increase in salaries went, performance evaluations are being conducted, so they started last year. None of the employees are receiving cost of living adjustments or steps. They're all merit-based increases. The library conducted a salary benchmarking study that helps us understand where we fall against our competitive landscape. And it says in their documents that they determined that a 3% sustained increase over the span of 5 years would prevent salaries from falling too far behind. On a positive note, that health insurance and other insurance for these guys is only up 4% which I wish we could say for the rest of our budget. No COVID expenses are included. Let's see, Friends are funding all capital investments. They fund all the books and capital improvements on the building. We talk about, I guess, turnover I thought was interesting, and Kara, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And kind of as a part of like a follow-up question I have for you, I know we've reached out with a few questions, but as far as turnover goes, 19 librarians have apparently left in the last 5 years, which is a turnover rate of 63%. Obviously, there's a cost to replacing them that we'd like to avoid. I think my question to you is this year. I mean, I understand the benchmarking effort. What percentage of our librarians received the 3% increase this year?
We call those our green circle individuals. Percentage-wise, my math is not good enough to do that in my head. I would say about 5 or 6 librarians out of 60, or actually out of 30 full-time librarians, received the 3%. So those were individuals in the current fiscal year who were identified as being below or underpaid.
So only 5 or 6 received the full 3%, and everybody else was less?
Everybody else was could receive up to 2 in the current fiscal year.
Okay, but the staffing, like the salary percentage was up over 3%. How does that work?
For current fiscal year, it was 2%. So the vast majority of staff members in the current fiscal year this year could only receive up to 2%. There was a very small pool of people who we identified this year.
That was last year's budget.
Right, last year's budget, right.
Right.
So projecting forward, I can get back to you on the specific numbers. I want to say that after we conducted and that was based on last year or the year before's benchmarking, with the updated information we have, I think we're looking at closer to about 15 to 16, maybe a little bit more, individuals who fall into that green circle pool.
And you said out of 60, is that right?
34 full-time.
Yes.
And how are those decisions made? Are those made just by, sort of the executive, like yourself and the team, or does the board get involved in those decisions?
In terms of how much merit increase, that is really primarily their direct supervisor and myself. So it's really merit-based. We're looking at job performance and performance against goals over the course of that year, and that really determines whether you're getting 0, 1, 2, or whatever the percentage is for that given year. So in next year's budget, if approved, individuals will be eligible for up to 3% based on that performance. Obviously, we're also considering where they fall in terms of that benchmarking, but there still has to be performance. So that's
and the 2 and 3%, is that set by the board or
no? That's set by what we can get in our budget. So we're looking at like this current fiscal year. When we were building the budget last year, we were very conservative and we didn't really know what the climate was going to be coming in, and we thought, what's the minimum percentage that'll keep us from falling too far behind, right? And we decided, okay, let's do 2%. Let's go in as lean and mean as we possibly can. And then last summer, we conducted that updated benchmarking research. We had a lot of new data from the Connecticut State Library Association, which we were able to refine that information. And that analysis showed that although our starting salaries for your entry-level librarian are sort of where they should be compared to our local peers, what happens is we fall behind after that 5-year mark. So as that librarian progresses in their career, especially first 5 years, most of our peer libraries are unionized, which means that you have people who are eligible for cost of living adjustments, salary steps, other things of that nature. So what happens at year 3, year 4, year 5 especially is where we're way behind. That's also where we start generally losing people, is after that 5-year mark. So no, the board's not involved in that decision, but we craft the budget, and it's really with the outlook of what's the minimum we need to maintain to stay competitive. Where do we need to keep our people so that at that 5-year mark and before we're not falling, well behind our peers in Greenwich and in Westport and in Stamford and so on.
Kara, what's happened to your pool of qualified replacements? Are you having trouble finding people?
We have, I think, 1 or 2 open positions currently, but we've been lucky so far in being able to fill some, most of the positions over the last few years of people that we've lost. COVID, I think, has definitely, similar to what a lot of employers are going through. COVID, I think, has caused a lot of people to sort of reevaluate where they are and where they want to be, and sort of think differently about life in general. So, we've had retirements happen this year and things of that nature because of those shifts. But we have a very strong reputation as being one of the very best libraries, not only in the state, but in the nation as well. And so we really take pride in what we do and the type of culture that we have at Darien Library that's very unique among public libraries. And so we really are forward in that in terms of our recruitment.
Both you, Kara, and Taylor, commented on the cost of training people and training new people that you bring in, and the effort that entails and so on. But there are companies that, particularly large companies, that actually run their employee pool by bringing them in, training them, keeping them for 5 years, and then sending them off to do something else. And then they bring in people at admittedly lower pay grades and trade them, and they find that that's an economic trade-off that makes sense for them. Are you doing anything like that? Or, it sounds to me as if you're, as you say in your presentation, which is a wonderful presentation, by the way, that you're very proud of the people that you've been able to send off and off to greater things elsewhere.
And we are. So the people that we, graduate, so to speak, who leave us, have gone on to do pretty amazing things, and we're very proud of that because they're out in the world sort of taking the Darien Library culture and spirit with them. But we would prefer to really retain these great individuals. Being a librarian, especially, when you're an entry-level librarian, most of the training, although it does require a master's degree and you learn a lot in school, it's really on-the-job training. And the longer you are doing the work day by day and getting to know the community and building relationships with the people in the community, with the families, with the children, that's really where the magic happens, and you sort of grow with the librarian. You might be introduced to baby story time, and then you're in a teen program, and then they're helping you with, your children and your grandkids. It's really that lifelong sort of relationship. And many of you who've been to Darien Library, know some of our staff members who've been there 15, 20, 30 years. And, while we know turnover is inevitable and we're going to see people come and go, and that's okay, and creativity and innovation can happen with those changes, we want to get the best people, and we hope that they stay because they really enrich, I think, the whole town and community. We really see ourselves as public servants. We're helpers. We're a helping profession, and we're really about those relationships and making a meaningful difference in the lives of residents. So, having too much turnover every 5 or 6 years might work for a big corporation, but it's not the kind of culture that we're really trying to build.
In terms of staffing, the overall level, it's sort of just over 3%, if you will, but within those subcategories, I think what you refer to as like the administrative groups, there's fairly substantial reductions in some and increases in other. Are those just shifting of people from one group to another?
Yeah.
And are those the same individuals just sort of repurposing their jobs, or did one leave and you hire a different person?
Most of that for this is reorganizations. We've taken a look at, some of it was COVID inspired. We took a look at some departments which used to be separate departments, and we thought, let's combine these two, or, we really have a need for a programming librarian. So, they used to be in the
Readers Advisory, doing, book ordering and working with readers one-on-one, but we need more people doing programs and events, and maybe we'll take that FT and move it over here. Or our technology and UX departments were separate entities. It made more sense to bring those together. So you see some of those shifts as a result of some of that strategic reorganization.
What about, there's a fair amount of investment going on in the school. We're building a new elementary school. We have three major renovations going on, a large piece of which is to kind of reimagine, redesign libraries to move into the 21st century and so forth. And then there's going to be 3 more school libraries that they're doing. Do you view any sort of future reduction in the demand for your library services, or change in the type of services that you need to deliver because of what's going on at the elementary school libraries? Or have you had discussions with the school about that?
I think it's wonderful that the town is investing in school libraries. The function of school libraries and public libraries, though, are very different. There's some crossover in terms of, we see those kids too in our spaces, but school libraries really exist primarily to support the curriculum in very specific ways. And support the faculty and students in the development of their reading and their research literacy. Public libraries are really about developing a lifelong love of learning and reading, culture and arts programming, technology and skill building, sort of across a much wider spectrum. When it comes to children in particular, the public library serves a role that's more about pleasure reading and reading for fun, as opposed to reading for assignments and that very specific curriculum.
Which
both
is
are
not
important, right? Well, it can be, but they're very different sort of purposes. And obviously, the public library at Darien Library is much more than your average or traditional, I should say, public library. Yes, we have books, and yes, we love reading and literacy, but we're also a real community center in a very different way. We're open to all, from cradle to cane, this idea that we're doing traditional things like author visits and book groups, but we host knitting clubs, we host Zoom events, we host how to code and learn coding. You name it, we do it, and we really view ourselves more as that community center as opposed to just books and reading. It's books and so much more.
Okay. Yeah, how many book clubs do you have?
Oh my gosh. Dozens at any given time?
We have 128 registered book clubs who use our book club services, and then we run, I think, 6 book groups ourselves, in addition to the 128 patron-based book groups. So we have a lot of book groups.
I know it's, immaterial, but what happened with the life insurance number? That was up over 28%.
I can double check. I know that the dollar amount is relatively low. It's about $4,200. It might just be. I'll check with our insurance agent. I can't remember off the top of my head why that was so large. It's about $4,200 and change a year. We're with the Hartford. I can find out.
Taylor, I think we can contrast that with the less than 5% increase in medical, and indeed the incredible bargain they got on their snowplow truck.
Yeah, no kidding. I was just curious for that.
I know with the health insurance, we've also benefited just recently in having more singles than families, things like that. So, that does ebb and flow, but we've sort of lucked out recently with a lot more singles than anticipated families. So.
And so is that helping to generate the lower overall number? Like, if you look at what you need to pay per employee, ceteris paribus, family, E+1 or just E, is that up 4%, or is the 4?
We're impressed with your language.
Or is the, what is the year-over-year employee or family increase versus what you're showing us here, the 4%?
So our health, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
Let me re-ask it.
Yeah.
What's happening to the individual cost of insuring a employee or a family year over year versus what we're seeing, which is the effect of maybe people moving from families to individual employees only?
So overall, it's about an 8% increase, but because we've benefited from not as many pluses on our employees, not as many families, it's much lower.
Okay. In the budget for next year, are you assuming the current staff stay in place, so the same number of single E+1 families?
That's how we budget, yeah.
And I guess just one other question I had was, we had discussed, last fall, and there had been some discussion around creating actual formal grant agreement, such that when we give this $4 million grant, it would actually be legally written down what the grant's to be used for, and even just include certain things as if there are excesses at the end of the year, what would happen with that grant and so forth. And so I just want to, Jen, do you know if somebody's taking the lead yet on?
That would come out of the first selectman's office and the town administrator's office, and I don't know if they've had a chance to get started on it.
Okay.
I haven't heard anything, but obviously we're very, open to the conversation and would love to talk more about it.
Okay. And that's, I think, to me, this is just more of a good housekeeping issue. I think when we look at sort of other grant relationships and so forth, even on the Board of Ed, they've taken things that have just historically been, say, a handshake or historical agreement, things like the use of the Y, they've then formalized that in an actual contract that just sort of lays out. I feel like just for this size grant, it would be good to have a grant agreement in place.
Maybe a last question on Friends of the Library continuing to keep up their end of the bargain and to fund your needs?
Yes, so every year the grant that we receive from the town of Darien funds about 77% of our total annual operating budget, and the Friends cover the remaining, that 23%. So that's through our annual campaign, donations to the annual campaign. It's through the revenues we get from several fundraising events that we do every year, and also from an annual transfer that we make from our endowment. So that 23% covers primarily what Taylor was describing, the books, the technology in the library, all the programs that we do, all the events, all of the stuff of a library. In addition, about 20% of that Friends budget that we use to fund our operating budget every year, about 20% of that we do use to cover salaries and benefits for staff members who do fundraising or any related activities. And as Taylor mentioned, the Friends also fund any CapEx needs. So when we need to do HVAC, or we need a new book sorting system or carpet replacement or whatever it might be, whether it's infrastructure, technology, they fund that. And that's been about $2.3 million over the last 3 years, and we're expecting $1.7 to $1.8 million in anticipated needs over the next 5 to 8 years or so.
But the plow truck is town.
That was town, right, to offset or to eliminate a need for a plow service next year, which we're very grateful for, and thank you again for supporting us in that.
Any other questions? The only maybe suggestion I would say is kind of going forward, I think it would be great if, just kind of given the size of this grant and so forth, if you could maybe on a quarterly basis or a semi-annual basis, just keep us updated on the major categories, like the top 10 different categories, how you're trending, versus budget. Just I think it's helpful, as we fund this grant, just to know if there's going to be a shortfall or a surplus. All of that sort of helps us, certainly on the surplus side, as we think about money flowing back into the general fund that we can use to pump into next year's budget or shortfalls. I think that's what.
Absolutely, I can even do that soon with the current year's budget and give you all an update.
Work with Jen directly.
Yeah.
And we can incorporate that quarterly or so, or semi-annually into our discussions.
Be happy to.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move back to B, which is Fire and Emergency Services. We have a few of the chiefs here. Appreciate you guys coming. If you would have been here a couple minutes earlier, we would have kept you in order. But so I think I'll kick things off on Fire and Emergency Services. Maybe just reminding everybody. I will say the largest portion of the Fire and Emergency Services budget is generally the capital. And this year, there's a handful of fire trucks that are coming up into the, where their spot replacement cycle has approached. And I think the tour we found very helpful, so thank you guys again for that. I think it was great to it was great to kind of see all that you do and how you do it and all the equipment that you have and care for it and so forth, and to really understand how you use some of it. Maybe I'll start off by talking a little bit about the 3 different vehicles that we're talking about, and just remind everybody, historically we had contributed annually, $500,000 or so to a vehicle replacement reserve, and I think I want to say 3 budget cycles ago, we decided we stopped making those contributions and drew down that balance to kind of finish up the handful of the couple of vehicles that had been identified and were being funded for, and we moved towards considering bonding for some of the fire trucks, particularly just given some of their sheer costs. So, in this year's budget, each of the fire departments have 1 vehicle. Darien has if I can remember these from memory, Rescue 44, which is a sort of rescue truck, equipment kind of truck. That was originally anticipated to cost, in the sort of $900,000 range. In talking with the chief over the last few days, getting an update on where they are in terms of pricing and so forth, that particular vehicle looks as though it's going to be considerably more expensive as they've kind of gotten further along in the design phase, and I think also reflecting just what's happening in the acquisition, just the overall cost of acquiring this apparatus and configuring it and so forth, the supply chain. There's a ton of reasons we've all been reading about, and now that's looking to be significantly more expensive.
How much?
The estimate now is that could be upwards of kind of 1.3 to 1.4 million, based on everything that they're seeing in terms of like the new pricing and so forth. And I think running through, let me just get my. So the next was, I'm just going to test my knowledge here. Norotan has engine 32, right?
That's correct.
For all those that don't remember, Darien's trucks start with 4, Norotan's with 3, and Norotan Heights with 2. One of the things we all learned on the tour. They had a truck identified which was anticipated to cost which we had budgeted $861,000 into the budget, and Norotan Heights had engine 23, which was a similar amount, $861,000. So I want to talk to everybody about like the process by which fire trucks are designed, and certainly, Zach, jump in here if I misspeak on anything. But when a truck is identified, a large piece of equipment that needs to be replaced, there's generally an equipment schedule, replacement schedule for each truck, and it's identified based on its useful life of when they anticipate it needs to be replaced. And then there's the sort of, as they get closer to that date, they're keeping an eye on it, and there's sort of large problems at the beginning to see with the truck. It's not functioning right. They can either get might be to be replaced a couple of years early, or if it's still functioning well, they can get a few more years out of it. But once they identify that a truck needs to be replaced, there's generally a committee formed within each fire department that'll actually sit down over a sort of 3 to 6 month period and identify what the need is for that truck. Identify sort of high-level configuration of what the new truck would look like, whether there needs to be any major changes to the type of truck that they're building, whether they need any new equipment on it, whether equipment can be sort of transferred from one truck to another. And they develop, I think, what I learned a few weeks ago as, I kind of call it the 5 or 10 page overview of the design specs of what they think each truck is going to be. And that's usually where they're coming up with an estimate of that they've provided in the budget in terms of what they think that's going to be. When they know that the town is going to support a new truck, That committee then begins to work with one or two or three suppliers to develop, I guess, what I call the 100-page set of specifications. And that's detailing everything right down to the type of tire, electric, light bulbs, everything that that needs to be in that truck to, to meet their needs. And, I think the way Zach and others and Scott have explained it is those manufacturers are willing and work with us to kind of put together that large 100-page set of specs, because they know that the fire departments have an appropriation and that they're going to be moving forward with the truck. And then that's when they get a much better estimate of exactly what those trucks would be, and then they put it out to bid to 1, 2, 3, 4 different entities, which come back, we ultimately sign a contract. And then from a funding standpoint, there's a relatively small amount due at the time you place the order, and the majority of it is due ultimately when the truck is delivered. So I think, in talking with the fire departments, each of these trucks on this year's budget schedule is in a different state of identifying the need, creating a committee, that sort of fire department committee building out their 10-page set of specs and coming up with a cost estimate, and then moving forward into working with a set of manufacturers to develop a 100-page set of specs. So I think if I was to characterize this right, I think Rescue 44 for Darien seems to be very far along in that process, and that they have a committee in place, and they're working towards a much more, and they've identified, I think, the full needs of what that truck is. I think Neuro, and I'm waiting for an update for some of the chiefs, is in the very beginning stages, I think, of creating the committee. They've identified the need to replace 32.
Committee's in place. I apologize, I didn't get you an update today. The committee's in place. We've had a few meetings, or had a meeting, and I will have an update for you, a timeline in the next few days.
Okay. And then I think Neuro Heights, I think, is, in the middle where they've identified the need. They've had the committee. I believe, right, Zach?
So just to back up, the committee doesn't necessarily meet when there's an appropriation or, a need for that at that time. They meet to decide, can we salvage what we have on the truck? Like you said before, the chassis, the body, the equipment that we carry, so on and so forth. We passed that process quite a bit. We're actually probably closer to where Darienne's at. Today I've been reviewing some drawings from one of the vendors that was able to get some stuff back to us this time. I provided you with the costs that we kind of ballparked it at with prior to any increases to the metal such materials. The only correction I would say at this point is that we're pretty far along in the process. Our committee's met, we have drawings, we know what the truck's going to look like, we know what the need is for our district, and that's all things that the committee has met and discussed at this point. So really, we know that the truck that we have currently in 23, it's a 1989. We purchased it in 2005. It was refurbished for our use in 2006 is when we took delivery of it. And it shows signs that it's time.
This was when we bought used?
This is the one we bought used from FB&Y. It was used as a training rig. Served us pretty well. Our district has kind of changed quite a bit. If you just take a look at Heights Roads projects, what's going on down there with the apartments and such. The committee's discussed that pretty in depth of what this truck needs to look like, what the truck needs to do to meet those needs, not only those needs, but of northern Darien where it's mostly residential. So we know what the truck looks like. We have a ballpark estimate of what it's going to cost at this point, and we're waiting to move forward once the town moves forward on their end as well. So.
And I think that the next steps for truck, the replacement of truck 23 would be when you have an appropriation, then bringing that out to the manufacturers and working towards what I call the 100-page set of specifications.
Yeah, it's a couple hundred pages, and it really defines everything in there from the wiring type, the gauge of the wire, from one end of the truck to the other. It defines everything that needs to go into the build.
Okay, so I think, in trying to think through these resolutions here, particularly given, some of the information we received back on the Darien truck, just in terms of the numbers that we have in here, like for instance, like 23 and 32, we have the identical number in here. So given that the expectation for these more expensive trucks, or that we're likely going to be considering bonding, there's one of the things to consider is whether or not the actual approval of the bonding resolution, because we're not going to issue the bonds. Once we issue the bond resolution, that's going to allow the fire department to go forward and develop the full 200-page detailed plans. They'll have to bid it out and ultimately sign a contract, and that process can take 6 months.
It all depends on the vendor.
The build process was the question? The build process?
To build the full set of specifications, which are then sent
6
out
months.
to the various manufacturers and solicit the bids, and ultimately have that awarded. I mean, that's fair. That's another somewhat lengthy process.
Yeah.
And so, when you think through that, and even once you sign the contract, generally we're not going to go to bond for the fire truck until we know if we're doing 1 to 2 bond issues a year, until we know that we're getting close to the delivery date, or in some instances we would pay for it out of the general fund and then just time the bonding once we're going to go to market with a larger financing.
Right, more than likely, we would end up paying for the whole thing and then reimburse ourselves in the next bond issue following that, because then we know the final amount, the exact amount that we have to borrow.
Yeah. So,
Jim, just going backwards from what you were saying before, the last truck that the Heights purchased was truck 20, just last year. There was no money due up front. The town has not paid anything towards this truck that's currently being built. It's upon delivery. Just to go back on what you're saying.
okay, so there's no down payment at all.
Correct.
Okay, and then that hasn't changed in this market at all?
It's all going to depend on the vendor that we go with, and
Okay. But the takeaway is virtually all of the money is due at the end of the contract. And so even if we were to approve a truck today, it's likely 1.5 years or 2 years before we would actually issue the bonding and have to pay for it, because we're not going to bond today to have funds sit in our savings account earning near nothing and pay interest on it. So one of the things to think about here is, because when we put the bonding resolution together, we want to make sure that we have a fairly accurate estimate of what of what the actual cost is going to be. And we're seeing, at least on one of them, there's fairly substantial movement in what it could be. We don't necessarily need to approve and send the bonding resolution if the cost estimates are not available at the time that we're sending all the other information to the RTM to approve the budget. We can approve the bonding resolutions at any one of our meetings and move that forward to the RTM at any given time. And so part of my thinking here, and something for the board to consider, is, do we need to kind of detach a little bit the way that we look at, develop plans for the fire trucks, ultimately approve them and so forth? Can we look at detaching them a bit from the normal budget process, where we need to know exactly what truck we're going to order on December 1st, when Kate and Jen and the Board of Selectmen are putting the budgets together, when not every truck may be ready. Some may get to the stage where, like for instance, where Heights and Darien are at, where they may get to it now, and others may get to it, not in the budget process. So one of the thinking here in terms of, are all 3 of these trucks ready today, or let's just say next Tuesday, to have a bonding resolution, to know what the final numbers are to put forward to the RTM, or for some of them, might it wait another month or another couple months in terms of putting them forward? This isn't, and I want to be clear here, this isn't us saying, changing the way we have supported all three fire departments, and will continue to support them going forward. This is now that we're looking at bonding them, there's a little bit different process, because if you think about it, the way we funded trucks before, we would put money into the reserve, and then you would show up and develop the 10-page set of specs and the 100-page set of specs, and then we'd have the money already reserved, so it wasn't forced into what I think is sometimes an unnatural December through March, construction process. Think about this more as the way that we do larger construction projects. So, long-winded way of saying, we're still getting some information back. Zach, and I'm waiting for Brendan sent some information, and then I'm waiting on more information from another one. But we may want to consider delaying approving the bonding appropriations until we have a better estimate of exactly what those numbers are going to be. So when we put it forward, we're not putting, like in the case of 44, a resolution forward, which could be 20% less than what it would actually cost.
Jim, am I understanding you right? What I'm hearing at least is because of the funding mechanism, how the bids are put together, we're telling the chiefs, we expect to pass a bonding resolution when the specs are more fully developed and we know what the price will be, even if it's not in the budget cycle, normal cycle.
Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't need to be in the budget cycle.
So
Yes.
Yeah, that's, I just
No
want to make
longer-
sure, I want to make sure I have.
It
the
no
right
longer
understanding.
needs to be in the budget cycle since we're funding it with bonds. When we
Right.
funded it in reserves, it was attached to the budget, but it no longer needs to be attached to the budget cycle.
Well, this might help us
So
reduce
my-
the lumpiness.
My question, and this is probably more to Jim than anybody, but once we go out to bid and it gets time for contract signing, the money will be there.
The money will not be, the appropriation needs to
Sure,
be.
okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
the authorization to spend will be.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
That makes sense.
And I think that,
Will be good.
and that's what we want to be clear about.
Very clear about it.
The authorization to spend is previously has been an authorization to put a certain amount of money into the apparatus reserve and put $500,000 in. And then when you came forward and you had the truck fully designed, it was just really the Board of Finance that had to allow that money to be withdrawn from the account. Now that it's an actual bond resolution, which is what we're looking for the larger ones. If we're talking about a $100,000 to $200,000 refurb that needs to be done, well, that's different. It could be done inside the budget cycle or inside a special appropriation. But now that it's a bonding resolution, it has to go in front of the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and then it gets pushed forward to the RTM because it's actual bonding.
I think that process makes a lot more sense and more natural. The way, having been involved in 4 truck builds myself personally, that not having to stick to that rigorous calendar-based budget cycle makes a lot more sense and allows for better preparation. I mean, as we all work through the regular operating capital budget, end of the fiscal or end of the calendar year into the next calendar year, trying to time that with the truck build at the same time is pretty demanding, especially at the higher end of the department.
Yeah.
I have a question. When we take title, whose name is on the title? Who owns this vehicle once it's been
Town of
delivered?
Darien.
Oh.
You get a certificate of origin when they're delivered.
Okay.
So I think, Jen, is it fair to compare it to like the schools? The town owns the schools and sort of gives them to the Board of Ed to operate. We will own the fire trucks.
Yes.
And the fire departments effectively operate and care for those. And
Yep.
so I think, we spoke a little bit about this today. I think what I'd like to do, if the board is generally in favor of this, is sort of come up with a little bit more formal process diagram so that you all can use that within your departments in terms of understanding when a need is identified, because there may be something in our replacement spreadsheet that says you need a truck in 2026, and you come to us and say you don't need it for another 2 years. But I think when you identify a need, bring it forward, to Jen, the Board of Selectmen, and ourselves, we'll identify it, kind of move to stage 2, which is where you all form the committee and do your work, which obviously the hundreds of hours that you guys spend putting together what I call the 10-page set of specs, you want to know that if you're doing that, we're all generally in line and agree with you with the need to replace this. In the same way the manufacturers aren't going to put hundreds and hundreds of hours into all those specs unless they know that we've identified an appropriation. So
I think that's a fantastic idea.
yeah.
That'd be very helpful.
So that is where we are in the large capital. We went through, and I'm not sure if people have questions, we talked a lot about the smaller capital, everything from the bail kits to the regular replacement of some of the scuba and so forth. I don't know that I have, does anyone have additional questions on those?
We all literally visualize the need.
Yeah.
Thank you for the tours.
Yeah, I found the tours to be exceptionally informative in terms of actually seeing the gear and understanding the gear and the need at the individual firefighter level. Particularly one of the things that struck me was, Zach, at your house, right, with the new federal project going up, knowing that some of the guys that might be asked to go into a fire at one of those projects don't have a bailout kit. Well, when they're going to be 50, 60 feet up on the third floor of that building, that's just not acceptable for the safety of the members of the house. So,
20 feet off the ground at the end of the road.
Yeah.
Chief,
So-
can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Just thinking about our tour, and today I was going on Heights, and I was looking at the building going up on the Heights side. It was kind of, to be really honest, I was kind of stunned at how high it was. And I'm pretty sure we asked this, but we have enough equipment to reach acceptable. Okay, just want to make sure, because I was, like I said, it was a bit stunning to me. Like
The new ladder
it.
truck at the Heights will be high enough to reach that facility, and the one from Darien is it Darien? Darien's,
No,
the one from Norotan is taller. Yeah.
This actually came up last year. We were getting the appropriation for truck 20. A building of that stature and the size. I mean, it's a lumber yard that's just built up. If you think about it in simplistic terms, as we do firemen, each ladder truck in town will have its own specific location if that were to be on fire. That's something that we've already pre-planned and decided. We're gonna follow through with training on that once they'll allow it, which isn't yet, but we're hoping for it soon. And so yes, we're gonna reach it. Everyone's gonna reach it, and so will Darien with the tower ladder. So
Just, like I said, just want to make sure. I think if you look at it from the West Avenue side, right, there's a bit of a slope going up there, so it doesn't look as tall, the building. But when you kind of lose the topography, if I'm saying this right, along Heights, and you look up to your left, I'm saying going toward the gas stations, like where it's pretty, maybe because I'm so used to not having a building that high in Darien.
wait until you're on the parking deck and you're looking straight up.
Yeah, I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
But I just throwing it out there.
That's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention on the, all other capital items, virtually everything is, replacement of the SCBA gear or, bailout kits, or, the stabilization jacks for Norotan, those types of things. The only other material items were effectively the joint and mortar repair at Norotan Heights, but that was approved through ARPA, so that's effectively removed from the budget. And the insulation project at Norotan Heights. But if you think about it, if they don't insulate the attic at Norotan Heights, then their heating costs are going to rise, so it's going to have an adverse effect on the operating budget. Other than that, the operating budgets were all effectively flat or 1%-ish increases. So certainly good stewards from that side of the equation.
Yeah. And I think also, like I guess on the capital side, with the ARPA funds, we're going to do all parts of the foundation around Norotan Heights, as opposed to we were originally going to kind of stage that over 3 or 4 years. And then the other piece is the classroom and sort of training room at the training grounds behind the transfer station. That was originally in the budget. That was pulled out. And we've redirected, I think it's $120,000 of ARPA funds. And then I would also say, I mean, just in terms of, you all are volunteers, but obviously very cost conscious. They're obviously working with and talking to Mike Lynch about whether or not, it would be prudent and possible to use one of the portables, I think from Holmes Elementary School, if that can be brought down and be repurposed and use that as a classroom. So I would just, just, again, thank you guys for what you do, but also just your willingness to kind of look at things like that to see where we might be able to repurpose or use something.
Or use that as one of them as a fire training. Light it on fire and go at it.
So thank you. And then, just continuing on inside the fire and emergency services, the fire commission budget, the fire marshal budget is up by $55,000, and that's the inclusion of one additional full-time fire inspector. And I think if I recall, the number is 466 new units that need to be inspected between residential and retail in these 3 new developments. And so that's, I think that as we know, we talked about, we've had the benefits of all the building permits over the last couple of years and so forth for these, and or the benefits of the tax revenue, and now, there are additional services that we need to bring on board to service them all.
And the nuance that I had not known before we found out about this was that those facilities have to be inspected every year.
Yeah.
Which, makes it absolutely necessary to have a person to do it, because it's not like it's one time at the time of construction.
So I mean, that's it on really on fire and emergency.
That tour was really invaluable.
It was,
Thank you.
it was great, and if anybody in town is watching our meeting, please go to TV 79 and watch the tour of the firehouses, because it was really informative.
Sorry, I missed it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Brenda, as you get better estimates, bring them back, and I'll work on over the next week or so putting it together and talk with the board about and Board of Selectmen about a little bit of a process document, so we can make sure we keep these all on track and not unnaturally kind of force them into your December budget. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, guys. Good night. Thank you.
Okay, next item is debt service. And so, there's 2 attachments I put together and sent around. So I wanted to talk for a few minutes just about these, and then hand it over to Jen to talk about some of the changes we're going to have to make, or we're going to consider in terms of transfers. So the first page, what I call the outstanding bonds. This is a list of all the bonds that will be outstanding as of the end of fiscal 22. We've arranged them by year of issue, and you can see that in total there will be $84.5 million of bonds outstanding. One of the things that we always work with Jen and our financial advisor to look at is whether or not there are any refunding opportunities. And you can see right now that, most of the bonds are non-callable. And those that are or becoming callable are so short-term in nature that even though there's a bit of a higher coupon on it, they come due relatively quickly. And so the cost incurred with going out and refinancing something that might have a less than a 1 year or 1 year maturity generally doesn't make sense. I'd also say, we've looked at, I think maybe 2 years ago, Jen, fiscal 20, we used some of our excess funds on hand to go out and buy some bonds that were maturing in the very near term because they had high coupons and interest rates were near zero. There also doesn't seem to be any real candidates where we could go out and buy them back, particularly bonds that are maturing in the current fiscal year.
Jim or Jen, how do we determine which bonds can be non-callable and callable?
When we issue,
Yeah.
it's part of the structure, when the first call comes. I think on our most recent issue, it was 7 years, 6 years, 7 years?
6 years.
It protects the investor.
Yeah, it makes our bonds a little bit more attractive if we're not able
No,
to
I used
call
to
them
buy
right
them
away.
when I was a treasurer, way back when. They were fun stuff.
So,
We used to call them bullets, I think, at one point. But it was more Jenny Mays and Freddie Macs and things like that.
all else being
All the time.
equal, like, if you look at the bottom of this page right here, when we look at like the deal we just did, here you can see this 29.9.
Industry.
Yep.
The first 4 bonds are non-callable. If you recall, there are no bonds maturing in the first 2 years.
Where are you, Jim?
On the very bottom
Yeah.
block of, which you can see it totals 29.95 million.
Yeah, the
That was-
2024, the February 22 issue.
Correct. So when you look at those, we didn't issue bonds in the first 2 years. The next 4 were non-callable. And then after that, all the bonds that mature beginning in 2029 and thereafter are callable in 2028 at par. So generally when we issue those bonds, you pay a little bit extra in terms of yield to buy a call option, to be able to call them at par to the extent rates come down. What we have to pay for that call option is relatively small in this environment, just because the level of rates that we're issuing at, although rates have popped up over the past 3 months, we're still operating at or near sort of all-time lows in terms of interest rates. But this is what our current indebtedness looks like.
Remind me again, with this 80, call it 85 million of debt, how much is toward the new school? And how much is still to be funded? Did we fund about half?
No, we funded more than half. We funded we funded what the cash flow projection said would get them to the end of the project. We expect there to be some over, either we'll get less from the grant or it'll run a little higher. But for the most part, we've issued what we think we're gonna spend on the project. And we've issued 58 million, 57 million, somewhere around there.
Yeah, that sounds about right, because the grant money comes back at the end.
Right. So we got the issue of the 31 million prior year, 30 million this year. You got 61. Obviously, not all of that is
Right.
school.
Both
right?
of those were almost entirely Oxbridge.
Okay.
And the bond deal we did in May of 2020 actually included a fair amount of premium on there. So that's why. And
It was good to get that tranche out, these 2 large tranches, considering interest rates.
well, if you look at in fiscal 23, we'll amortize $7.6 million of debt in this upcoming, sort of in the year, in the budget that we're talking about right now. And then if you look at the next 4 or 5 years, there's just under $6 million of amortization per year. So if you look at all of that debt, just in the next 5 years, we'll amortize $30 million. And, if you look at this right here and you flip to does everyone have a copy of the graph?
Yep.
You can see that the debt service for fiscal 23 is over $10 million. And you can see that in fiscal 24 and thereafter, it drops down to, in the $7 million range.
And this takes into account the elementary school projects then?
It doesn't, but if you look at that debt service graph, you can see why we've not been putting, I think, Jen, 2 years now, we've not been putting principal in the first 2 years and beginning to have principal amortize when our debt service steps down by $3 million. So by doing that, we've been able to take on more debt, close to $60 million for the schools, and not have any real material increase in the amount of debt service that we're spending per year.
Right.
We, of course, need to pay interest on that, but by avoiding the principal, we put the principal into the years where our debt service is materially lower.
But why isn't it included in this?
Oh, just because we haven't issued it yet?
No,
Oh,
the
but it's
Oxford, the Oxford stuff is all included.
It's off of-
Yes. The
Right.
HHR stuff is not included.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, we're not anywhere close to issuing anything.
Correct.
Because it says projections, and I would assume it would be in here, but.
Sorry, this is our contracted debt service for all the debt service, for all the debt that we have outstanding. So, not a lot to talk about with debt service in terms of we issue it, we need to repay it. So, Jen, do you want to?
Sure. So on the list of open items in our master file, there's some recommended changes. Some of them aren't even recommended. They're what we need to do to true up what's in the budget to match up with our actual interest due on the issue that we just did in February. So overall, the Board of Selectmen's budget contained estimates that we had from December. But as we know, the rate was actually higher. So we need to increase our debt service expenditure budget by $111,761. But on the revenue side, we have money in the fiscal '22 budget because we were anticipating that we would have a 6-month interest payment on this new issue. But we issued after January 1st, so we don't have any interest due in the current year. So we're going to have $294,000 in the current year budget that we are not going to be using for debt service. So my recommendation is, because we've already taxed for that for the purpose of paying interest on our newest issue, we didn't get any premium, so we should cover issuance costs out of that, and those are going to be around $96,500. We're still waiting for a couple of invoices. But then the difference, my recommendation is that we transfer it in the current year, we transfer it out of debt service and into our debt service fund, so it doesn't close to fund balance at the end of the year. And then we budget that to come back in from the debt service fund on the revenue side in fiscal '23. It'll be about $197,933 to offset some of the interest that we will be paying on the new issue. The only other little kink to that is there's a sewer fund transfer that is related to that. So our net revenue in would be $189,464, and the increase in debt service for the issue is $111. So we have a little extra revenue coming in.
So rather than basically contribute that to the unassigned fund balance, you're suggesting just pushing it into fiscal '23's account?
Yep.
Just
Move it out to debt service, then move it back in fiscal '23 and use it all for what its original
to
intended
offset
purpose
whatever,
was.
yeah, what our scheduled debt service would be.
Right.
So it'll be a couple $100,000 less.
Right. We'll keep the for year-over-year purposes too. On the expenditure side, it'll be our full debt service required payment, but we'll have revenue offsetting some of that. So
Okay.
net budget impact will be reduced.
So we're really using it to pay the increased interest.
Yeah, it's covering.
Yeah.
I mean, you can look at it multiple ways, but we're going to use funds that we've already taxed for in the '23 budget to cover interest, some of the interest on that.
And how did we come up with $200,000 extra in this?
Because when we put together the fiscal '22 budget, we assumed that we would be doing the issue that we did in February. We assumed that we would do it in the first half of the year, which would have resulted in if we have to pay interest every 6 months.
Understand.
So if we had issued in the first half of the year,
First
we
half
would
of
have
the
had.
fiscal year instead of the second half of the fiscal year.
Exactly.
Thank you. One less interest payment.
Correct.
And there ended up being none in the current year, so.
Yeah.
Right.
So there were a lot of numbers, you tossed around a lot of numbers, so what will be the net impact on the '23 budget amount?
On the revenue side,
Plus 200,000 of revenue.
190. And then on the expenditure side, we have to increase 111.
So it benefits us by $79,000.
Right. So if you are amenable to that, what I would recommend is we wait until we get all the invoices in for cost of issuance, so we know the exact amount. And then we'll cover all the cost of issuance, and we'll transfer whatever remains over to the debt service fund. I'll bring that transfer request to you once we have the final numbers.
And when will we, in terms of how much we budget, when will we know all the cost of issuance?
I would recommend that we budget what I just told you and what's on our open items list, because it's very small invoices that I'm still waiting on.
Oh, so if it moves around a little bit?
If it moves around a little bit, it's no problem.
Got it.
If anything, I've estimated on the high side for the last couple invoices that I think are gonna come in, so we might eke out a couple $100 more or something like that, but it's not gonna be material.
Okay. Well, yeah, I would support that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, we're using dollars that we taxed last year for the same use just this year.
Wait for vote.
Well, I think we're going to vote on, Jen, do we actually need to vote on the transfer now, or would we vote on the transfer on Tuesday?
You will, it's not even, it won't even be to you on Tuesday. I'm thinking it'll probably end up being the May meeting. By the time we get everything, get the invoices and get the final number, there's nothing to vote on right now.
Okay, so effectively, like the budget we're going to put forward to the RTM will be less than what's needed, if you will, to pay that interest, because we're going to ultimately transfer that in at a later date. No?
No, the budget that you're gonna put forward on the expenditure side is 100% what our debt service cost is, because it's gonna come in on the revenue side and just offset. It's not gonna net down the expense.
So we'll show that as an assumed revenue.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, any other questions?
No.
Okay. Next is the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenses and revenue. And Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about the email, maybe run us all through the email you sent around today in terms of where, summary of kind of where revenues are?
Well, none of those are RFCNRE revenues. That was all general fund that I sent today. I can talk a little bit about the RFCNRE revenues.
Okay.
In the Board of Selectmen's budget, so it sounds like there is probably consensus on the board to bond fire trucks. If that is the case, in the Board of Selectmen's budget, they assumed spending the fire trucks, as well as they did put in bond revenue to offset it, so there was zero budget impact. We'll take out both sides of that. They'll completely come out of the budget. There'll be no budgetary impact, all of that. So that was one significant RFCNRE revenue. But we have about 500, I gave you the number today, David. It's over $500,000 of revenues that go directly into the reserve for capital non-recurring and reduce what we have to contribute from the general fund. The two major ones that we have are the LoSiP grant, which is about $115,000, and the Town Aid Road grant, which is about $340,000. Then we have minimal interest income. I think it's less than $10,000. And then new in fiscal 23 is we're going to be transferring in from a grant fund account where we have been collecting a portion of recording fees that the state allows us to use for local capital. So we have $40,000 coming in from that account. And then there's some rent, about $28,000 of rent that also goes in there. But that roughly $500,000+ reduces what the general fund has to contribute to cover our capital.
And in terms of things such as rent, Jen, I mean, these are small increases here. These are all contractual.
Yes.
So there's really nothing to estimate there. Those are
No.
contracted. And on the investment income, this is not total investment income. This is just investment income
Allocated to this fund.
This fund, right? And that's down, slightly from last year, which we know we're already under budget. And I think, listen, these are relatively small numbers. I think on the investment income side, I know, Joan has told us she's looking at another number of different options to try to, enhance our earnings yield. But not a lot here.
No, and what we do at the end of the year is, say $1 million was budgeted to be transferred from the general fund, and we budgeted 500,000 of revenues in RFCNRE. We actually look at what were the actual revenues. So if we take in more on investment income than what we expected, we would reduce what actually gets transferred from the general fund. The only thing that we do not budget for that can sometimes have a big impact on the revenue is if we sell a fixed asset. We deposit the funds that we get back into the reserve for capital non-recurring. So that would also, at the end of the year, factor into what we actually transfer from the general fund.
And are there any trucks or so forth, bigger assets that we're going to look to sell?
Well, something like the Freightliner that DPW is doing. If there's anything that can be sold from that vehicle, if they get any amount of money from sale of that, we would deposit it into this fund. In the past, there's been the sale of fire apparatus, which we don't get all that much, but we do get some money in. And a lot of times with vehicles, it depends, because the department will make the decision, is it worth it to trade it in? Does that benefit us, or does it benefit us to actually sell it?
But once money goes in, for money to come out,
It has to be appropriated.
still has to be appropriated, same way as a general fund. So this is just a different fund, but it's still appropriations need to go to the RTM.
Right.
So can we talk about general fund revenue as well?
Sure. So that is what I sent around. Projection of general
Is
fund.
this other revenues, Jim, or is this?
Yes, this is all revenues that are not revenues into the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenditures, which I think include what we call other revenues, right?
I'm
Right.
sorry, and when was this sent around?
This morning. Was it this morning?
So are we gonna go back to excess cost, or are we,
Well,
are we skipping ahead?
Okay, I don't think I have anything from this morning.
No, this isn't, excess cost doesn't go in here.
It's on your agenda.
No. We're still in reserve fund, capital non-recurring,
Yeah.
and revenue. Like, so we're still in the second half of E.
Right, and what I'm saying is other revenues is G. Are we doing that now, or are we
No.
waiting and doing that later?
Oh. Does this include G?
E doesn't include G.
Okay.
I don't have an email from this morning unless I.
No, I take that back. It's the one from yesterday that had the projection in it. that
Okay, that's what I have.
You were asking me about, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's the one I emailed you back and forth on yesterday?
I think you emailed me this morning.
That was this morning?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
What day of the week is it?
It's budget month.
We're almost
I
there.
actually had to ask him, like, I'm sorry, I don't know if you're asking or confirming.
Right.
It just wasn't clicking.
We're agreeing, but we didn't know that we were agreeing.
Okay, so are we doing general fund, other revenues, or are we doing excess cost?
General fund.
Okay, so in the projection that I sent around yesterday, I tried to separate what's going on with town accounts, excluding the park and rec program fees, because we know that's its own animal. So on the revenue side, the projected surplus, excluding the rec program fees, is about 1.25 million. And then the recreation program fee surplus is estimated at 780,000. But of that 1.2 million, the biggest factors are town clerk revenues. I'm projecting a surplus of just under 1.3 million in that revenue line. And that's based on a point in time comparison with the last 5 years, just looking at what percentage of the total do we normally take in from March to June, which is typically more active real estate time. So there is some risk that may not happen if the market does cool down, but based on historical, that's what I'm projecting for that account. And then on current taxes, using the same method of point-in-time comparison with the last 5 years, we're looking at about a $670,000 surplus in that account.
And
Those
that is entirely due to collection rate? Or is it?
It's a couple things. It's that the levy gets adjusted after we set the budget. So additions, subtractions, hopefully more additions. And then collection rate versus what we assumed. Also, what factors into that is the supplemental motor vehicle and real estate appropriations. Those usually differ from what we budget. So those two big positives are offsetting a projected shortfall of about $260,000 in building permits. And then all the other lines, pluses and minuses here and there, are about $430,000 short of budget. But overall, on the town revenue side, we're looking at about a $1.25 million surplus.
So the current taxes on the motor vehicle, didn't, like, I recall, didn't the valuations go up, like the assessments go up? Or-
Yes, but as of October 1st.
Which was after we set the budget last year.
Right. So those would factor into the grand list that we have now
Yes.
for this fiscal 23 budget.
But it's a lag. We set it in April, guessing what the grand list is going to be on
No.
October, right?
No, you set your budget off of the prior year's grand list. So the fiscal 23 budget is based on the October 2021 grand list.
Yes, but then isn't it readjusted for what's on it in October? Like if a new truck, if a new vehicle gets added to the list.
They do,
Yes.
they do a supplemental, yes. But the supplemental that we did for the current year didn't include those increases in valuation. Our grand list for this coming year showed the 25% increase in motor vehicle values.
But didn't we collect some of that in the prior year? Because it takes effect in October?
I don't believe so. I can check with Tony on the
Okay.
timing of the supplemental.
Is this normal that we would be, fire marshal's revenue, for example, $100,000 short of our budget?
No, because I looked at that one today, and after I prepared all of this, he got a $77,000 revenue.
Of course he did.
That's another.
I went back, I was going through things, I'm
Doesn't
like,
like putting the pressure on.
And what's that, what is that kind of revenue?
something of that magnitude would be inspection fees for probably the new developments. I didn't have a chance to check with him about it.
No problem, that's good.
Yeah, so that one is actually,
And what about, and refuse permits? I would think that'd be an incredibly stable number.
it should be, and we're coming up to the sale period, but again, based on looking at where we are point in time with prior years and what prior year, end of year stuff looked like, that is my projection. I think those two, obviously fire marshal is gonna be better than projected. But I think the refuse permits have potential to be better than projected. I think that the tax and the town clerk have potential to be not as good as projected.
Got it, yep.
So the biggest mover here, I think, is really the town clerk revenue, right?
Yes.
Which it was significantly up last year. It's trending up this year.
Mm-hmm.
The question is this going to continue, given that a lot of that is driven by home sales?
Right.
And somebody can only move in if somebody else is selling, right? And refinancings as well, right?
Right, but the home sales are definitely more of it, because you get the conveyance fee with it.
Yeah.
You know, we budgeted 1.6 million, that's been our consistent number, and it's served us well, except for the last 2 years. You know, I don't think we can expect that this current volume would continue, but I don't know if we can expect that it would immediately go back to normal, or it may even go back to less than normal, because anyone who wants to move has already sold their house, and now there's nothing for sale for people to move in. but it has been significantly more than budget for 2 years now.
Yeah, I don't know, do people have an opinion on this? I mean, it's really, how much of the increase is just really the acceleration of sales that would have happened over the next couple of years?
Well, you did budget for '23 a decline, I think, right? And
We
building-
budgeted
and
1.6 again, I think.
Versus the actual.
The typical 1.6.
Am I looking at the right number of
Here.
building permits?
Town
No,
clerk.
no, we're looking at town clerk revenue.
Okay, so remind me where that is. It's not in-
Page 2,
Oh, it's
under
in-
section
it's-
2, licenses
it's-
and permits. Out of the report she sent out yesterday.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at OpenGov.
Go all the way down.
Oh, you're looking at open government.
Town clerk, I was looking for clerk,
Yeah.
couldn't find it.
And Jen, this additional spreadsheet you sent us, was our budget 1.52 last year or 1.6? Or no,
Yeah,
sorry, in
it's flat.
21.
In
It's flat.
21, it was 1.52 because we actually reduced it during the
COVID.
start of COVID,
Yeah.
thinking
Convenience.
nobody's going to be moving.
Right, right.
Because nobody was showing houses, nobody was,
Right, yeah.
no houses.
So it's flat, it is, the budget is
Yeah.
flat.
Right.
Jim, I've had some conversations on this because I do agree that there's been a significant movement, that the people who were initially selling the house was there, and from speaking to some people, there's not as much coming onto the market as what was happening in the prior years. That being said, the premium for what the house, the $1 million house was selling for is not a $1 million house, so that we could have less unit sales and still result in significant increase in revenues. Somebody I was just speaking to put their house on the market, and 1 week later, they had 26 bids. So that's where I agreed to put in anything like another $3 million is not reasonable, but historically, we've been underreporting revenue, and to increase it by 100,000 is not deadly, but it still starts to bring it more in line with what I expect is going to be happening next year.
I mean, if you go back to fiscal '20, I mean, that was 1.6. I mean, Jen, do you have the number, does somebody have the number before that?
Yeah,
I mean, it was 3.1, it's going to be someplace in the 2s this year. That's adding a lot back to the grant list. I mean, to the general fund.
Yeah.
It's excessively costly.
So the punchline here is you think there could be some softness on town clerk revenue.
Yes.
But what I'm hearing from Jack is maybe not. Because there's less number of homes selling, but they're selling at higher price points.
Significant, which is why people are coming back into the market, because their $1 million home is now going for 1.4, 1.5, and that's enough of an incentive for people to say, you know what, time to cash out.
But I think there are dramatically fewer homes on the market, right? Like, I think the number.
I understand, but
I mean, I get what you're
again,
saying.
you have to look at, if you look at Zillow and look at what things are listing for and what they're selling for, it's as if we're in San Francisco with all cash
Yeah,
deals.
but I think the question is, will the increase in P make up for the decrease in Q?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think you're going to end up with a $3 million revenue, but I also don't think you're going to end up with a 1.6.
Yeah.
And so someplace between, let's say, 1.6 and 2 is probably a reasonable number.
Yeah, I
So
would
if you
agree.
went up by 100 or so, you're not killing yourself, but it's still a basis point off our taxes. And that's still being conservative.
I mean, Jen, is it every 140,000 is that 1 mil?
Not 1 mil, no.
Or
A
point-
mil is 8.7 million.
0.1.
87,000.
Yeah, 87,000, 8.1.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Or
one gives us
0.01.
approximately 1 mil off the taxes.
So,
Okay.
Something to think about.
So that was the revenue side?
Right.
I mean, in order of size, it's town clerk revenue, then it's building permits, which, we've talked about, that's trailed off significantly, and we're assuming we're back in our sort of run rate of around $1.2 million, and then after that, it's fire marshal revenue. Everything else is relatively small and/or consistent.
Should we talk about the collection rate at all in this discussion, or is that a Tuesday item?
Well, it's a
As
general
much as
fund.
you can talk about tonight is better, so that we're not, for one thing, I don't like having to do calculations on the fly, because I want to double check it and not have you guys vote on the wrong number. So if there are things like that, if there's proposals, if you don't want to settle on it tonight, that's fine, but if there's a couple of proposals, at least I can put together a couple different scenarios, and then based on your discussion on Tuesday, we can know what that number is.
So we,
On town clerk, just for that one, do we want to put in a 200?
Don't ask me, ask
No, I'm
them.
saying, do we want
Yeah,
to
that's
have something in there so she's
possible
ready to go on
proposal.
Tuesday night?
Yes.
Do we want to stick in
I'd be
200 and we can decide, we can all think about, look at
Yeah.
this data and think about whether it should be more than that?
I think 200 will be fine, because, theoretically, to Jack's point, we've overtaxed in prior years, right? And 200 is likely to be relatively close,
So are we adding 200 to the revenue?
Yes.
Yeah, and
Park
that would take 2 points off the mill rate plus a little bit.
Have you put in any surplus for
points.
the Board of Ed?
.02, you know that.
That wouldn't go into the budget, that would be part of your guys' discussion of how much of fund balance you want to.
That is in the mill rate projection that she's prepared.
If I may add something else, I'd like it to be as accurate as possible, because what she's doing for you on Tuesday night, I'm taking those sheets to F&B on Wednesday night, and we're voting on the budget the day after you do. So as clean as they are for Jen, it makes our life easier on Wednesday.
Well, we'll be done on Tuesday night at some point. So.
I have to be.
So, on the revenue side, are any other changes that anyone wants to, right now, we're just going to stick with the 200,000 on the clerk revenue?
I'm fine with that.
Well, can we just go through the items on the open items list? We had the proposal to do the transfer in from the special ed reserve. Is there some level of comfort with that, close out that reserve, move it into the general
Yes.
fund?
It hasn't been touched since when?
Yes.
Yes.
More than a decade.
We've talked about the Board of Ed, Dr. Adley,
Yes.
the board's discussed it and said it's
Rolling
fine.
in.
And then there was a question asked, not so much a definite proposal, but should we be looking at interest income, again, just based on the current rate environment? Is that anything you want to discuss
And
tonight?
remind.
Is that an other revenues discussion, item G?
Yes, you're in the sheet.
I take my job very seriously as secretary.
Well, though, it's all the same item on the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just leave it all
So if I
as
was, I would just like start there.
All right, so I
and
should
the
put
next
them all
one would be
together.
there.
Okay, that's fine.
Taylor, you've been in G for a while.
Well, I thought so.
Yeah, you were right.
Yeah.
What are we, so the budget, the budgeted number was 73?
71?
And that was based on
It was based
funds
15?
at 15 basis points.
Yes.
Right. And you guys may not want to discuss it, but it was one thing that was
Well, this is the time to
mentioned,
discuss
yeah.
it, as you said, right? If we're going to discuss it, it should be tonight. I made a couple of notes a couple of weeks ago, I'm trying to find it, because the prevailing rates
Yeah.
is kind of what I was trying to
Well,
look at.
I think we need to like,
Are we talking interest again?
Interest income on fund balance.
So what's the original number we have in here?
71,000.
Which is 15 basis points.
15 basis points on the available balance.
And there's another 8,000 in the reserve fund for, so it's really 80,000 combined, right, Jen?
Well, some gets allocated to other funds as well, but the budget for the general fund is 71.
Yeah.
And is the entire general fund exposed to get interest on it? So like $23 million number, $24 million number? Lower, higher, 25?
Higher, because all of our operating funds go in there too, like when tax funds come in, but then we draw them down.
So like negative working
So
capital.
the question is, how quick does 2015 go up?
Well, so
Which becomes the problem, right? Because market rates will rise as the Fed changes policy,
Right.
but banks are awash in liquidity, so they may not be pushing rates higher as quickly, and it creates a. But
Every time the Fed has increased something, I go to any of my accounts and it's up 10 to 15 basis points.
Not ours.
No, I understand on the commercial side, but
But it's not just commercial side, just to be clear, it's the municipal side.
Right.
It's
Right.
how,
Government funds
it's,
that-
Because of the
it's what a
reserves,
bank,
it has to keep-
I
okay, would,
fully
yeah.
understand having worked in
Right,
But the fact of the matter is that the original calculation was superb based upon what the current year's assessment was, and in fact that we were under and what we were getting paid. It's just that the rates are changing. And it's as simple as that. So how much of a change is it? I'd have to speak to Joan and see what Joan thought, because I couldn't answer.
But Joan has shared her opinion with us, right, which is that she
Yeah.
wants to stay at 15? Or have we talked to her more recently than that?
She's at 15.
Yeah.
She has not come off that. We haven't asked her to, but she's at 15 basis points. That's her budget recommendation.
I mean, are the CD rates going up much faster? I don't know how they,
The deposit rates, which she has access to, are going up significantly slower than what the overall level of rates are that you're seeing when you pick up the Wall Street Journal. And it's because of what she can invest in, and what she can invest in, those rates are dramatically lower, because when she invests our money, the banks need to hold incredibly more reserves, 100% basically, versus when you put your money in your checking account, they're only holding a fraction of that.
the CDs are much higher than deposits. Like, and I know she takes advantage, it's not a huge amount of money, but she puts some money.
Yeah, we have some in CDs.
Yeah.
$10 million, something like that.
And they're higher for the smaller banks than they are for the bigger banks, right?
Generally.
And Joan, from the past report that she did, remember, if we're doing bonding, Joan has taken a fiduciary responsibility by putting it into places like Chase, which is historically paying us less than what we would get at People's.
Right.
So it's not, we may have $50 million, but the source of those funds are determining where Joan is putting the money and what the yield are going to be.
So what we don't want to do is put a budget number out there that is going to put Joan in difficult position of trying to achieve a budget and sacrificing her judgment as to where those large deposits should be in order to achieve the budget.
Well, that is theoretically an appropriate statement. My own conversations with Joan is Joan will not ever
Yeah.
put herself at risk.
Yeah.
And nor
in
is
order
this
to achieve
a
the budget.
referendum on her performance if she falls short. Like, that's our decision. We're gonna change it. I mean, I fully take responsibility for that decision, right? That's not anything she didn't like.
That's the way that I would view it. If we change what her recommendation is, then it's on us, not on her.
Said another way, is there anybody in the room tonight that knows more about this than she does?
It's a good point.
Yeah.
Really good point.
I'm hesitant to change this. I know that, I know she's spending time investigating things like T-bills, put a lot of effort into bringing that to a head, and that can produce additional revenue if and when she does, and it's still, we're not going to lose it. The question is,
I'm with Dan on this. I agree. Mike, I want to trust her judgment. She does it every day. Where just sitting here.
Yeah.
Trying to.
It's a percentage of the total budget.
It's, yeah, and
It's a spec.
like if we take 71 and make it 129 grand in the whole scheme of things. Right. It's just not, we got other things that tweak it.
I'm fine leaving it where it is.
Me too.
Okay with that?
Just to give Jen an answer, so.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you.
I kind of, guys, I kind of put this into the same thing, like when we haircut the collection rate a little bit.
Yeah.
There's no question that, our treasurer invests safely, and she maximizes the amount that she can earn on it. And even when we take a haircut to the collection rate, which is part timing and part absolute collections, there's no doubt that our tax collector is trying to collect every single penny out there.
Yep.
So no change on interest?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's put it
So
zero.
even if she doesn't that about become a lien against the property?
If it makes it that far, but it generally never does.
Right.
So that's what I was asking earlier. Are we talking about tax collection rate tonight, or is that a Tuesday night?
I think we should talk about it tonight.
We're still going through open items.
And is that a part of, the,
Yeah.
where does that fall?
It all falls under number 3. Included but not limited to.
You mean E?
All of the above.
We're gonna end up with Z.
Hey, feel free to fire
Taylor's
me.
uncomfortable with the flow between E and F and G.
The power of the pen.
The fluidity.
Happy to go back to F.
Yeah, we never talked about excess costs.
So open items, I guess, in E, since tax revenues technically are a revenue, right, to the general fund, right?
Actual current tax collection rate.
Yeah, and so what we've typically done is take a consistent haircut to what the actual collection rate has been for the past 5 years.
Can I just ask a question? Because Jen knows I tried to calculate this on my own and was unsuccessful in getting a number that I was comfortable with, probably due to my own user error in that methodology. Can we put a dollar perspective on what 25 basis points is?
That's what I want to know too.
So I'm just trying to figure out is that
140 million.
is 25 basis points of material?
It's a few $100,000.
It's a few $100,000.
A 25 basis point.
Yeah, in the collection rate.
So if we change it by 5 basis points, we're talking about a really small amount.
Yep.
Yeah, you'd have to make a decision to
That's 25.
cut it by 10 or 15.
And the average
basis
right now, the
points.
last 5 years is 99.47, right, Jen?
The average is 99.72.
Sorry, 7.2, and then.
And then the last 25 basis points puts us at 99.47. Which is, it's been going up, which is kind of interesting, because we've been using this method for a while. We were at 99.3 in fiscal 19, 99.36 in 20, 21 is a lost cause, and then 99.45 in the current year. And now we're looking at 99.47 in 23.
Jen, under property tax revenue, there's property taxes current, and below that, property taxes prior just the aged
Right, uncollected
amounts
from
coming in.
prior years.
So doesn't all this stuff tend to net itself out over between a year or two, and you're getting in prior year's taxes currently?
So yeah, the more that we collect in the current year, then we see the prior year going down in future years.
But again, if you don't get it this year,
You
comes
will
in
get
next
it
year,
eventually.
and if you're effectively accounting for, or at least projecting a number based on this year's, which is lower, this year plus collections of prior years should pretty much bring you home.
Yep.
All right, so if it's $87,000 is 0.01 on the mill rate, how many basis points of?
0.04. It's about 350.
He's talking about something else, I think.
I'm talking about something else.
It's 4 basis points, 87,000.
No,
All right, go ahead, sorry.
Okay,
We're all getting a little punchy.
We're getting a punchy, yeah, absolutely.
If $87,000 is 0.01 on the mill rate,
Yep.
how many basis points difference in the collection rate equals $87,000? Are we talking about, if we change the subtraction from 25 to 10, or 25 to 15?
He just, it looks
I
like
just
5
20,
basis.
so 25 I think 25 basis points on $140 million is $350,000.
Okay.
So
All right,
perfect.
so if you went from 25 basis points to 12.5 basis points, you'd be at 175.
Okay,
2 bips.
so it'd be 2 bips.
2 bips. So it was 4 bips at 350, it'd be 2, it's.
Sorry, yeah, you were 2 steps ahead of me, thank you, sir.
So we're still back to trying to figure out a number.
Well, I guess the
99.
question before the board is, are people comfortable changing that 25 basis points, yes or no? And if so,
Well-
how much?
I'm trying to figure out, what's our, like, historic rate of, like, missing this? Like, how much have we,
This is all about risk tolerance.
Yeah.
It's all about risk
All
tolerance,
about
because
risk
historically
tolerance,
it's
because
generated
they're
350.
empirically, we shouldn't be deducting the 25 basis points.
Exactly.
But do we really, if we miss it this next year, then we have an issue.
And it
'Cause
is
it's
our
meaningful.
biggest revenue
It's
item.
meaningful because it's a big numerator.
So the average of the last 5 years is 99.7.
Yeah.
So the question is, the 25 basis point haircut, I mean, it's,
$350,000.
yeah.
But there's a second part to that. Remember, there's 2 parts to this. One is, and I love the analysis that Jen does, we're estimating what we're going to be doing on the grand list. But there's modifications throughout the year to that grand list, sometimes up, sometimes down. So part of that 25 basis points allows for the fluctuation in that grand list. And Jen, you can explain this better, but that's part of what the 25 is. Because what we're basing it on, and if you look at that analysis, is never the final number. And I think Jen was referring to that a little bit before on the supplementals. Am I reasonably close on that?
Yes. And over the last couple years, actually over most of the years that we look at, our actual levy, what we estimated at the time of budget, the final levy ended up being less than what we had anticipated.
I mean, like, in a pure intellectual sense, we'd go back and we'd take a haircut to the levy, to the actual grand list, to account for changes in that, and then we take a haircut to the collection rate, because those are the real 2 actions that are taking place. By taking the 25 basis point cut, we're effectively encapsulating variability in both of those variables in just one haircut.
Right.
So we could take a 1 basis point haircut to the grand list and take a 20 basis point haircut to the collection rate. The big issue is we're taking $300,000+ of a haircut off of the taxes that we think we're going to collect. I mean, I think that's almost the easiest way to think about it.
Yeah. Absolutely,
Whether
yeah.
to deal with a $12.5 billion grand list, or appraised value, which is a $8.5 billion grand list.
Right.
Bearing all that down, we're assuming $144 million worth of taxes will move around by $350,000.
I don't see any need to change it. I really don't. I mean, this is kind of the way we've operated. We did try to modify it a couple years ago, anticipating what might happen in COVID, and it didn't happen.
We were
Right?
way off.
We were way off. So I think this methodology served us well, and we end up with a surplus.
To that point, though, the reason we modified it during COVID was because we thought that was real, like, economic hardship in the community, and that we were gonna come in much lower than we were, and we
Yep.
still didn't. So if we're still taking a 25 basis point haircut, like, I think maybe it's overly conservative.
Yeah, the counter argument is theoretically you're overtaxing residents in the current year right?
Yeah.
But in theory, we're taking surpluses that we're going to have last year and moving it over. So we're talking about
A 1 year.
a decimal of a percentage that's being moved from one tax year, one tax base to the next.
If you have a consistent practice of taking any surplus that rolls over and using it to buy down the mill rate in the next year, yes, that would be accurate.
Yeah. I think we've been pretty consistent about taking,
Yeah.
a extremely large portion of our projected surpluses and reinvesting them into the next budget.
Key word being projected surpluses,
Yes.
because their surpluses aren't surpluses until the fiscal year ends.
Yes.
Right.
So we still have to be careful about
Sure. Yeah.
applying all all of it.
Oh, come on, I know Jen's projections are gonna be 100% accurate.
Just like the fire marshal
The
one.
risk of that is, if we're ending up with $2 to $3 million, and this year we happen to have significant increases in both the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen capital, the use of the grand list is not used for operating budgets, it's used for capital. So we would have to continue to see a sizable amount of capital requests that we're not bonding in order to use prior years' surpluses to pay down the capital. So like last year, we had zero capital because we used the grand list. This year we happen to be up, I think it's about 5 million, so if you come down, we still have that. But if we're back down to 2 to 3 million and we end up with a $3 million surplus, then that's just going into the general fund. You've got to remember, we're only using it for capital and not for operating expenses.
But it can also be used for, if we didn't have enough capital in a budget request and there's a $1 million fire truck being requested, we don't have to bond a fire truck.
Yeah,
And we don't have 20 years of debt service on it.
And last year is a little bit, I mean, we talked about a large Board of Ed surplus coming back that we moved into capital. There really wasn't a large Board of Ed surplus. We gave them an additional $1.7 million appropriation, of which they then gave us back something a little bit less than that. So it's
right. I just want the public who's listening to understand the Board of Finance does not use that for operating budgets unless it's a special appropriation for a special need.
So 25 basis points below the last 5 year, which will be 99.47. We all feel like we're going to stick with that?
Sticking with it.
Yeah, with it.
Okay. Jen, what else is?
Quick other items on the open item list. Taylor, there's no letter for it, but these are going to be expenditure items.
Motion, add an I.
Let's talk about it for 1 second. If I send this out, it has to look like the agenda, correct? Or is someone going to get upset if it doesn't? This is all to help the listener find what we
So the
talked
agenda
about.
has numeral 3, and as long as everything that you're capturing is under numeral
Under
3,
three.
Yes.
you're not
Right.
really going to get.
But those who watch it will know that you were
No,
looking
your
at
wrist
it.
is
care
not
about
going to get
them.
slapped because it's
I know how
an E
frustrated
versus
it was
H.
this year not to find them on the.
Label this
board
part of the
site.
minutes to just be G through H.
Yes, yes.
We're going to start G through H now.
Okay.
We already
I think
did
it was
G.
E through
Instead of-
I.
Okay, other things on the,
Go ahead.
Open items, if you looked at the list, I have $17,000 for hydrant charges. We got a rate increase notice from Aquarian, and this is what the calculation comes out to increase it by $17,000. They can have additional rate changes throughout the year if they're approved by Pura, but this is based on what they are anticipating at the time. Do we have a thumbs up on that?
Yeah,
well, yeah,
that's a go.
this is just increasing the budget by that.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
It's not really a decision to be made, it's
Yes.
what we should do.
And we talked about the interest, the 111, the 3 numbers are
Yep.
above it. Okay.
And then the last one was David had proposed a reduction of $50,000 to the BOF contingency to bring it back down to the same amount that budgeted in fiscal '22.
Sure. I'll have an issue with that.
Yeah, because when I looked at it, the average over the past 5 years was $139,000 that was utilized. The peak year was $267 in '21, but that included several items that were COVID related, including the additional beach security guard, and that beach security guard is now rolled into the operating budget of Park and Rec. So that was my thinking.
So it's going from 250 to 200?
No,
300 to 250.
Last year it was 250. And this year was proposed to go to 300. I'm just proposing to leave it
Keep
flat
it
at
at
250.
Yeah.
Good with that?
I'm good with bringing it back down to 250. I mean, the biggest draw on it this year was the civilian dispatch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, theoretically the HHR, but we hope to give that back to you at the end of the month.
That came out of a different account.
Oh, that was the capital side.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I need to go back to school.
Open items list for capital. $15,000 for Weed Beach painting. This came up at the last meeting. Do you want to add it back into capital, or do you want to proceed with the recommendation that we ask them to put forward a request to take it out of contingency in the current year.
I would like that, because I think that would have to go to the Board of Selectmen, and then they would put it back to us, and we just transfer it over, and we could get it done now,
Right.
as opposed to waiting to get it done in
Right, yeah.
July 1.
And then
Agreed.
you would support that.
And
Yeah.
Agreed.
that way it's open before the folks start using the beach.
So now add it back into the budget, handle it through current year. budget.
Go for the current year,
Yes.
so,
Yep.
Yes.
yeah, so don't add it in this budget, keep it. Listen, I applaud the selectmen for keeping that out, for taking it out in the face of an extra, before we knew we were doing with the ARPA grants, but I think, given that, I mean, these are getting a lot of use, and we should keep them spruced up.
BOE, the fourth suburban, you have some paperwork on that. We can talk about that after. Is there anything else that you would like to bond? I had on the open items list, these, for your discussion, sidewalk repair and replacement, you have bonded this for the last 2 years. It's $750,000 in the current budget, as well as some significant amounts of $750 and $500 in some of the out years. Do you want to bond this, or do you want to leave it in the budget?
I'd be in favor of bonding it. And there's 720 plus another one
There's $750 for repair and replacement, $120 for new sidewalks.
new.
And by new sidewalks, they mean new location, where there's never been a sidewalk before.
And what's, remind me, what's the cycle on, what's the replacement cycle?
If it's asphalt, I believe it's 20 years. If it's concrete, it's 50 years.
Okay.
And the requirement for bonding is, has to be, have a useful life of how long to be bonded.
Honestly, there really isn't a requirement. I've seen people bond like keyboards.
The best practice.
But for
you
best
know,
practices,
we would want something 10 years plus, because we would match the term of the issue.
yeah, that's what I was,
with the
that's what I
life
was
of the
thinking,
asset.
that's what I was thinking.
Didn't we bond sidewalks last year?
Yeah, last 2 years.
All right,
Yes.
yeah,
So
then we
this
should
is
do it this
consistent
year.
with
So-
what we've done.
And new sidewalks as well.
So
Yeah, a couple
Right.
years ago, we had new sidewalks.
so we're talking about doing 870 versus 750 of bonding.
Yep,
I mean, it's all new sidewalks.
So that changes that number, right?
yes. So if you want to do all sidewalks, it would be the 750 of repair and replacement and the 120 of new location, for a total of 870.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And, good.
Is there anything else that you want to discuss, Bob?
What are your thoughts on, Richard sent us a fair amount of detail on the rehab, quote, complete redo of the track and all their surrounding, the high jump, pole vault, all that stuff. That's $460,000.
That would be an appropriate use of bond funds, if you so desire.
And what about if we're gonna talk about that, should we also talk about the paving and sidewalking for the Edgerton project? Because that was another 400 and something, yeah?
Yeah, it's 460 for basically goes from the Middlesex down to the old
Yeah,
senior center. It's 460,000. It's the road and it's the sidewalk. I mean, we haven't bonded. I think the most of that is the road, not the actual sidewalk, and we haven't bonded paving before.
yeah, fair enough, that sounds right. The sidewalk, it will be like 20% of it, and the rest will be the roadway, is my guess, for rough estimates, right?
Yeah.
I don't know for sure.
The Board of Ed track does make sense. If I recall, a number of years back, Jim, and you may recall this, we did bond one of the fields, if I'm not mistaken, for about $600,000.
Yeah, we did a baseball field or a
We did
turf
the
field?
we did the stadium.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's
yes.
right.
Yeah,
So that would be consistent, especially since this is
All right.
surrounding that.
all right, yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, and to be clear, this isn't just repaint, like spraying the top of it, which they did 5 years ago, and you can start to see the wear and tear. This was a true
No, this
sort
is
of overhaul of
a
that.
full rebuild.
And Jen, is that something we need to think about, only bonding over 10 versus 20?
Yeah, I'll flag it so that when we actually go to issue, we can have that discussion when you guys talk structure of the bond, and we'll make sure that if you want to shorten the term on that piece of it, that Mark is aware and can set it up properly.
So some of these bigger ones, I do think bonding makes sense, because particularly if they're not gonna start it for a year or maybe a year and a half, some of these bigger projects, then we're not taxing and having that money just sit in a project account.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed 100%. Two things strike me. I'm just sort of sitting here looking at an unassigned fund balance for no reason at all, and I'm looking at Crimmins, and the purchase price of Crimmins 128,209, which actually seems to be about, I thought the real number was 150 something, but anyway, that's not my question. My question is dropping the other shoe. What's it going to cost to raise the property? It seems to me, I mean, you drive by that house, it's a potential safety hazard for people wandering around it and so on. But anyway, to raise the house and make a park out of it. And second of all, there's the Gorham Dam repair, whatever happens to that, and that's going to be a significant amount of money for somebody to fund. So I mean, it's something to put on the bonding table to be considered.
So on Crimmins, you're correct that our portion was about 150. The 128 that you see there is just the general fund portion. We had about 30,000 in our land purchase fund. That was the other part of our 25%.
Okay.
But I believe the full grant amount, of which that's our 25%, included all the remediation, the demolition, as well as the actual purchase.
I'm 99% sure that's going
Yeah.
to
It was about 30,000 that was in there, and we get reimbursed
No, it
for
includes
it once
the
we
raising
do
of
it.
the house
Right.
and turning it
Yeah.
back to
Okay.
land.
Good, I didn't know that.
And then as it relates to the Rings End Bridge, I think they've made a lot of progress in determining what that is. When that larger project, I mean, I think he estimated 1.2, 1.4, what that could have been. I mean, I think that's definitely something that we'd have to look at bonding. But I think we need to wait for that to come forward.
Sure.
Maybe it comes forward by the time that we need to. I mean, it doesn't sound like the big project will be ready for.
No, I wouldn't rush to do a bond authorization on that at this time.
So I think any other things that, Jen, you thought were eligible or appropriate for bonding?
Not really. Most everything is kind of smaller or shorter term.
So I don't know if are you keeping your Volpe report spreadsheet current with these changes?
No, I don't have all of those linked in.
Okay.
But if you
But
look
I'll
at-
send out an update tomorrow.
Do you have a list of the changes we've discussed tonight and what the net amount of that is?
Sure. So, on general
This is the
fund.
delta to the last spreadsheet you sent us, right?
No, it's a running total and just tacked on to what I already had in.
Okay.
Okay, so actually, let's put it this way. 200 plus 200,000 on revenue, that was not in the model, the last revision that you had.
Yep.
Minus what we just talked about for bonding, which is 1,320,000. And I think everything else was already in.
And plus the 11,000 for the fire hydrant?
That was already factored into my model.
The 100 for the special ed was already factored in?
Yep.
Okay.
And so what's that mill rate there?
I'm doing that. You just basically take $1.5 million out of
What's got to be
the
raised by
fund.
taxes, yeah.
Yeah, and that takes it to a 3.86% increase. Does that sound right? I just subtracted 1.5 from the taxes required.
I'm at a 3.94% increase, 17.5, but this is why I don't want to do it on Tuesday night.
Yeah, so I just put in 1.520. Was an additional 200,000 of revenue.
Yep.
And it was an additional 1.3 million of bonding.
Yep,
So that's a $1.5 million reduction
yep.
in required taxes.
Yep. Yeah, that extra, I just put in 1.5, so now I'm at 3.88.
Okay, all right.
Mill rate of 17.49.
That's what I've got. Okay.
Drag this on, but, and it may not be.
You have 17.9?
49.
4.9.
So if we were to drive a mill rate increase within guidance of 2.5% to 3%, we would have to examine rolling a portion of the combined surplus into next year's budget. Is that accurate?
Yes, if you want to bring down the mill rate anymore.
And I think we should talk about some of that tonight. And
That's why,
yeah,
I agree with that. So I think, yeah.
So I think the Board of Ed side, you know, they gave us an update yesterday that they were looking at 600, 650. The largest chunk of that was a result of the ECS increase. And I think Dr. Hadley and Rich both said that they felt pretty good about that.
ECR.
Sorry, what did I say?
ECS.
ECR. That, that wasn't going to move around. And then if you look at the surpluses that we're looking at for this year,
On the town side.
Right, town expenditures are projected to be 1.3. $1.3
To the
million.
positive,
Yep. And again, that's excluding recreation programs.
And revenues were
1.2.
1.2.
So it's a total of like 2.5.
Yeah, if you're just looking at
And about
those two
3.1
pieces.
if with the Board of Ed.
Yeah. So 2.5 with the Board of Ed, 3.1 of surpluses. So the question is.
And then we get about 200,000 from rec programs.
So that,
And an additional 500,000, 500 to 600 sitting in the capital reserve, even though I know you like keeping that powder dry.
well,
But we didn't, did we talk about reserve closeouts contributing as well?
Well, yeah, so just in terms, let's first talk about surpluses. It looks like we have a combination of 2.5, 600, and another 200 between town, Board of Ed, and Park.
What does that add up to?
It's about 3.4.
About 3.4, yeah.
So I guess what I would say is I'm not in favor of just plugging in 3.4 because I think these are just projected surpluses. We do have 3 months left and
But our
things.
general fund is more than
How about
healthy.
the general fund?
We're at 29,
No, so, but,
29 million.
what?
Based off the current projections, everything you see there, that rolling list, we're at 29 in the general fund. $29 million. So
Yeah.
I think we have, as a board, should think about, do we move a part of that, like we did last year where we took $1 million?
I was even gonna say, do we want to bond all 1.3 if we've got bonding coming, like for the new whatever it is,
Well,
HHR and do.
I mean, should we be thinking about this, Jenna, in 3 different buckets? Surplus that we would appropriate, existing amounts in the Board of Finance capital reserve that we should consider, that are over what we think our steady state should be, which has ranged from kind of 400 to 800,000, and then amounts that we may want to actually use out of the general fund for capital.
I
Or is
see
1 and 3
number
the
1
same?
and 3 is the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
But also, well, I thought the third bucket was gonna be bonding. So there's surplus,
surprise.
plus
Well, I think
reserve
we've already-
closeouts,
yeah.
plus bonding. But what Taylor just said is maybe we should reconsider bonding if we're, and use more of the general fund or more of the surplus and less of the bonding, since we've got 75 million in bonding coming up.
Well,
It's a conversation.
well, let's talk about this. What is, after we've removed the bonding candidates that we just talked about, what's the total amount of Board of Ed plus Board of Selectmen capital that's remaining?
See, now we actually have to go in.
now she has.
We don't get to do
now
just
she
the
has to
plug
do
number.
calculations on the fly.
Don't like that.
It's better it's done at
Let's,
10:03 on Thursday night.
On Thursday night,
Than
then.
Tuesday.
Yes.
On
And
Tuesday.
7:01 on Tuesday.
Yeah.
7:31 on Tuesday.
Yeah, they keep filming till 12, you know, when the show is over.
Hey, Taylor. Can I unplug you from?
Oh, yeah. Be fully charged now.
You're right, but I got one behind you if you want to.
It doesn't work.
Oh, that's awesome. Perfect.
Down.
Serve for decorative purposes.
Where they're gonna refurb this room.
One of the reasons.
that doesn't make sense. Hang on. I think it's 3.5, but it just seems a little weird, so I just want to look at one thing. I just want to see if the fire is already out.
How do we not have uploaded the parts?
It doesn't work.
It was working.
Does that mean it doesn't work for me? I didn't even check today. No, I'm good. It's hard to get it in there.
Dan, take the oh, he's back. Take the commandos. He's got number
Hiding.
He's
But
hiding
do
as
we
we.
need to know this number right now, or are we just talking about like how much are we comfortable bringing the general
Well,
fund?
yeah,
I guess
down?
the question-
yeah, I
that's
think
exactly
that's
what's the
a
maximum
better
amount
That's
that we
exactly
can
what we're
go.
talking about.
Because we only want to bring amounts out of the general fund, I think, to equal capital.
Correct.
To Jack's point,
Yeah.
not in excess of the capital.
But also remember, because of, and which I know Jim will talk about when we get to the fund balance, and I think Jen showed also, because where our budget is increasing, that 15% also increases where you want to be for what it is. So it's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
as
yeah,
if we're
Yeah.
just, this is all free money.
Right.
No, no,
We
no.
have to account that the budget's also going up.
Right.
Beyond our benchmark.
And I think that with the worksheet that Jen gave us accounted for that.
Very much so.
Yep.
So yeah, if you come up with what you're currently comfortable with contributing from the general fund, we can run all the numbers, and then on Tuesday, we can actually discuss how that would be applied. If it's gonna be to pull some capital out and actually get it going sooner through a special appropriation, or if you wanna actually contribute it into the capital fund, we can figure out the hows on Tuesday.
But you think that the non-bondable capital right now is 3.5?
I think it's less than that. But what's throwing me off is how the fire trucks are in there. And I don't feel comfortable saying that it's 3.5 after that 1.3 comes out.
Is it no greater than half of that number, the 3.4?
Well, look, can I suggest we do it this way? If we're looking at a $3.4 million surplus, and we know we have extra money in the general fund, if we wanted to target $1 and there wasn't enough capital to, there wasn't enough capital to cover that, then I think we could take things, I would think about things that we know we're gonna do right away, like sidewalks, as opposed to something that, like the school track that could not start for a year. And I would allocate, maybe we could bond a little bit less.
School track, he was gonna start this summer.
He was gonna do this summer, yeah.
I think that's what ideally they're looking to do, but I don't know if it's contracted yet, but.
Well, that's a question we should ask him.
I think that's an approach. The other approach I was thinking, the last number you did, Dan, right? I think you somewhat confirmed it. We're at a 3.74 increase in the mill rate, right? Wasn't that the number you had? Something
Yeah,
like that? 3.8?
Let me get to that.
Which I think we double counted the 750 on the replacement sidewalks. I think that was already in.
You think that was in?
Yeah.
In bonding.
Your footnote says it includes assumed bonding of 2.6 million.
That was for
Ignore that?
fire trucks.
That was for the fire trucks.
No, yeah, okay.
On the Volpe, that was for the fire trucks.
All right. It was 1741 with the million, with the,
$1.2 million, $1.3 million, then 200,000 in revenue.
What you sent around to us did not have the sidewalks removed.
I think it had the sidewalk repair and replacement.
that was wrong, Rob.
I think it was already in there. I played around with this
3.86%.
so much that I don't know what my original was.
So what I was driving at, if we took half this surplus and added it to that number.
Yeah, but the surplus is basically goes back in the general fund.
Yeah.
I know, we're getting to the same place.
Yeah, my thing was almost, I'm re-engineering it this way, like if we're at, just say where we're at right now, 3.8, what's this board comfortable with in terms of just a general mill increase? Like my personal preference would be high 2s, low 3s, right? That's another, call it 75, 80 bips.
So if you took 50% of that 3.4 million
Mm-hmm.
and added it to the 152 that we were at before, you get to a 7.3 mill rate, which is a 2.7% increase. So just to give you, that's not necessarily a proposal, but that gives you the order of magnitude.
By only doing 1.5?
No, and then 50% of the surplus, which is, so add 1.7 to the 1.5.
Or lack of better
Oh, so
word.
it's 3.2.
3.2 total.
Yeah, so you kind of almost got the bonded side, right? And you
Some of
got
that's from
coming out of
bonding.
general fund is,
And some of that's
$1.7
from
million,
surplus.
right?
And almost none of it is from.
So 3.2 gets us to.
Well, the surplus and the general fund are the same thing.
Then 3.2 gets us
Instead
to.
of the surplus
We're
going
talking
into the
about
general
having,
fund.
like
1.5.
anticipated new surplus versus like what's sitting in there now, because that went up again, right? We're at what, like 19% now?
Oh.
Jim, I think you were saying the 3.2. I look at it as $1.5 million in bonding, maybe $1.5 million out of general fund, right? And then we're probably at 2.89, 2.91, somewhere around that number.
But if there's going to be somewhere up to 3.4 going back into the general fund.
The new anticipated?
Man, I'm just,
We
in my logic, I'm just lifting out $1.5 million out of it.
Well,
So how about,
we could try.
how about this? How about if I do the calculations of really where we are with what you have decided on, as well as what additional is needed to get it under 3?
The increase in the.
Because is your target to be under 3?
Why don't
could
you,
take
if,
that
could you
number,
show us what gets us to 3,
account.
2.75, and 2.5?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give us the rate.
As a percent mill rate increase.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, one of the analysis that's passed around is the police, and the chief was saying that he's anticipating to have 1 or 2 vacancies throughout next year. But the budget you have currently.
It's fully funded, fully staffed.
So even though you're playing with the excess and how to play on capital, to get to that number, you haven't talked about expenses, which, you know, even if you're keeping it flat or at 2 to 3%, a reduction of $175,000 off the police budget is 2 basis points that continue to bring it down. So, you know, Jim's point before where he said, let's talk about expenses, I think needs to be talked about before you then calculate what you need to do out of the general fund.
So, but just to give, guys, make sure Jen knows what she's looking for, we're asking her for how much will we have to contribute for the general fund, whether it's money that's already in there or a percentage of the up to 3.4 that could go back in there to get us to 3, 2.75, and 2.5. I think maybe one other scenario would be, what would be the dollar amount if we funded 100% of the capital, which we've currently identified as we're not going to bond. Does that make sense for?
Yes.
Fair enough.
Is it
Jim, I think that's
fair to say, though, that we don't believe we will need to fund that reduction through either operating budget? Through any, we've gone through proposed changes to the operating budgets and the capital budgets. do we think we'll need to do anything further to the operating or capital budgets for either budget on top of what we're talking about here?
It doesn't feel like, to me, given the excesses we have from the two budgets, what I think is prudently bondable, that we would need to cut either operating budget to get to a mill rate sub 3.
That's acceptable. Yeah, I would agree with that completely, because I think we've been talking about the fact that there will still be cushion in next year's budget from both the tax collection methodology and the police department budget. So both of those are going to give you some additional protection anyway.
I'll tell you, from an F&B perspective, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. And that is that the expenses should be the expenses. And so if you know that somebody's going to have, is anticipating to have open staff, budgeting that for that, I'd rather have the money in the general fund.
You're talking about police?
Well, in the police, we were just talking about that.
Well, we've also got the investment revenue that could change.
I'd rather that the operating budgets be in line to what you anticipated to be.
Well, then, to be consistent with that methodology, you're also saying that we should just use the 5-year average tax rate and not deduct the 25 basis points
No,
either. Because
I always believed in the 25.
Yeah, but you got to be consistent. If you're going to treat the expenses that way, you got to treat the revenues that way too. You got to treat them both the same. You either budget them exactly to your best estimate, or you budget.
I think if you look at the last 5 years of what the operating budget of the Board of Selectmen has been, and what they have returned to the town coffers, it is significant for a $35 million budget. And so I'm saying it's time that we get to a little bit, and I think they did do a good budget, but with the information we've had, there is some capability to do some reductions there.
Well,
that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, so
It's going to be your choice.
Regarding the police salary that we're talking about, what we heard, there's no doubt they are looking to try to hire those people ASAP to get them in. So I have a concern, like not, I think I have a concern not giving that money, because Don is out there, Chief Anderson, trying to get those people in today. Might they not come in? Correct. I think the more similar comparison is like if you look at the Board of Ed side, they have a couple hundred, close to $200,000 worth of budget control for students that may or may not come. They don't know if they're going to, I think we heard Rich say they're equally at, have a probability of dropping down 1 or 2 as they do going up 1 or 2.
Exactly.
But that exists in that budget. So those two things I view as a little bit of comparable in terms of what those amounts are in each of those operating budgets.
They did reduce budget control to 2 teachers, and the average cost is, I believe, between 65 and 70,000, so that's about 140, and that's a more realistic.
Is that fully loaded with benefits?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what that is.
I think that's 2 step 14s with benefits.
And since they have 3 sections that are, they have 3 sections that are 3 students away, that has a greater probability of breaking one of those sections than based upon that there's a police shortage not only in Connecticut but nationwide.
I'm not comfortable not funding the police department's budget request with them in the full throes of trying to fill those positions.
I'm just saying.
I don't think anybody was talking about cutting it though, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's what we're saying.
Yeah,
That's exactly what he's saying.
We've had,
Yeah.
on the civilian dispatch, I think we've had a full staff for 2 months since, throughout the entire process. So it's sort of like almost having certain areas, like most of the town staff is pretty consistent, has longevity in what's going on. But police, we've seen turnover, and the question is it not wise, if not this year, to consider next year whether or not the same type of staff turnover that we use in the Board of Ed is something that to be considered. I don't know if it's a half body, one body, or something like that.
But we're not doing that. For the Board of Ed, we're assuming 24 turnover of teachers going from, it's up 19 to, I think, 14, and they had 54. So they had 54 this year.
Hey,
But
Jack,
this was an outlier.
you know what I would say? I would say if we're gonna open up that can of worms with all these departments, right? The Board of Education has returned funds every year that I remember.
Yep.
Maybe 10 years in a row,
They have to.
right?
Yes,
So the
but-
question is, if you start going to Board of Education, 300 is gonna come off of them, police is gonna be 250. I mean, we could literally go through each department and say, everybody's probably been over budget the last 6 to 7 years that I remember. You've been on the board long enough, right? I think, just my own opinion is, I would rather do it the way we're kind of talking about it right now, which is a little bit of capital, a little bit of general funds. Because in the long run, the general fund is just all these overages are coming in there.
And Jack, really what we're doing is, this year, in that police budget, there are some funds being returned because we're not at our full force that the community needs. And through what we're talking about here, about recycling those, we're taking those same dollars and putting them in next year's budget, effectively, for them to be able to assign
I'm
it.
just providing a different perspective on this.
Yeah, all right.
Because, and, you know, Rob, you and I have been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
But $1 million coming back from the Board of Ed, not counting the money that they spend, that, you know, before they spend the money in the past.
Right.
It's $1 million on a $100 million budget.
Agreed.
When you're talking about the same $100 million coming on a $35 million budget, which has been pretty consistent, that's where you have to look at the two comparisons and say,
I agree, and I will just say this.
I like the budget.
Right, I don't ever remember the surplus on the Board of Selectmen side being as high as this one. Now, maybe it's a once-off, I just don't, like, for people, I think it's I'll put it this way, a freaky year.
Yeah.
Right, like, it's just, I'm shocked that it's actually $1.3 million.
But
And I don't know the history,
Yeah, and
maybe
if
Jen,
you
you
look
could maybe look up how much the difference has been. for
Yeah, we have
surplus.
history on that.
I'm stunned that it's $1.3 million. And police is driving half of that. I think it's sorry if Dan, if you were saying something, where I think it's a one-time event.
I think it's been about $1 million if you look at revenue and expenses. And then you have to remember that for about 4 or 5 years, we put in $750 on building revenue in
Right.
anticipation of the 3 projects that we knew would eventually come in, and we moved it to $650, if I recall. But, you know, if you take away that, we still had combined revenue and expenses of about $1 million.
I'd love to strip out the revenue piece to the expense piece and see.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna resolve this here. I think, listen, your point's taken about the surpluses. I think what's driving this year's is particularly pointed towards vacancies. And if you look at the last couple of years, our contingency, which we've continued to bring down from 400 to 300, down to 250, Jack, that also falls into that. So that's not necessarily the staff's over budgeting, that's us having a higher contingency than what we needed, and we've brought that down.
That's a fair statement.
And so I think like this past year, like 900,000 of the $1.3 million is vacancies. Another 100,000 is us from our contingency. That's $1 million, so it's not that significant. But I think, you know, understood, we'll all think about that. I think, Jen, you have your scenarios.
Yeah, so down to 3, 2.75, 2.5, and what dollar amount if we funded 100% of the non-bonded capital?
So what, I'm sorry, down to 3, 275,
And
2
2.5.
scenarios or 3 scenarios?
3.
2.5, 275, 3.0?
And 3.
Yeah.
Those being the
And how might
percentage
those-
increase in the mill rate.
And what funding would those 3 scenarios require?
Yep.
Yeah.
Again, without touching the operating budgets or capital budgets, as
Right.
we've discussed. With all
Just
due
budget
respect.
as
With
is,
all
and
due
what does it
respect.
take from fund balance and or
But see
capital
what-
reserve?
Yeah.
Right.
And then a fourth one, which will be max capital.
Okay. Good.
Okay, so I think so we've covered basically fund balance inside this conversation of bringing it back.
What percentage
It's
of
eight,
fund
Rob.
balance? What percentage of fund balance am I at right now?
What minute did we start talking
Above
about
that, how far above the 15%?
So Jen, if you could, is it possible each one of those scenarios to show what our resulting fund balance would be for each of those 4 different
Scenario.
fund balance and surplus usages? And then what that fund balance would be as a percentage of,
Yeah.
I say our budgeted revenues, but also we also look at our actual expenses.
Right, we do it over our,
Yeah. The rating agency way and our way.
well, we don't do it the rating agency way because I have no way of knowing our gap revenues because I don't know what the on behalf teacher pension contribution is until we get the audit.
Oh, that's
Which is why we
That's right,
switched
that's-
to just budgeted.
yes.
Okay. I got it.
So there's one other item of business here. We talked about on Tuesday, the Board of Ed has this 4th Suburban, which they need to get for $62,000. And they wanted to, we talked about the ability to, whether we can appropriate that out of our own capital reserve to help them effectively be able to order tomorrow. Or as Duke and Alan pointed out, their meeting is going to be on Wednesday, so they would vote on Wednesday to accept this money, which I'd like to recommend that we that we transfer to them in order to buy it. So basically, it would be them being able to order it next Wednesday versus having to wait until like May 18th or May.
No, if we moved it to the RTM, the sooner they'd be able to do it is the 28th.
Yeah.
We actually talked about it at our meeting yesterday and thought that if you take it out of the capital reserve, it's the best alternative to what's going on.
Can you take a vote to add other business?
So I would like to.
I wasn't going to tell you.
Do I have a motion to add to new business to discuss and take action on a potential appropriate transfer from our capital account to the Board of Ed to advance the purchase of a Suburban? Is there a motion to add that to other business? David, second. Taylor, all those in favor? It's unanimous.
Let's add the item.
So now we've added an item to discuss
Write down the time.
advancing the funding of a Suburban.
I did.
Does Jen have a vote?
So we've added the item to the agenda.
Yes.
So I will make the motion to make the transfer of the $62,000 from the Board of Finance Reserve to the to-be-determined account number purchase of the Suburban $62,000.
Okay. May I have a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
Paul, all those in favor? Thank you.
I smell adjournment.
So Duke and Allen indicated that their board would vote it on Wednesday and
Yep.
send you a formal request.
Yep, and once they do that, then we'll put it in the ledger and they can go ahead and order whatever they're able to find.
Perfect. And I think that moves it up over a month versus putting it through the whole budget process, and a couple weeks versus pushing it through to the RTM. With Jack, I appreciate you all discussing this last night. I spoke to the chair of the education committee, and he thought this was also a good idea. So
Perhaps they should check to find out where the library sources its vehicles.
Good idea.
So, is there a motion to adjourn? Dan? John, second. All those in favor?
Paul's already out the door.
We're adjourned.